This might finally be the end of that useless daughter-in-law. I came home early and overheard my mother-in-law speaking in an oddly cheerful tone. Right after, I heard my husband laughing, his laugh dripping with disgust. I tiptoed into the dark hallway near the kitchen, where they were talking, holding my breath so they wouldn't hear me. "Tonight's the night, Mom, tomorrow is her big day," my husband said. "I wonder how Mr. Abushi will react to all this." "I can't wait," my mother-in-law replied, grinding something and adding it to the pot on the stove. Then she smiled, her expression twisted and mean. I gasped. What, did she really just do that? I was shocked, but I didn't let it rattle me for long. If they were setting a trap, I'd make sure it backfired. They seem to forget one key thing: I'm very good at dealing with situations like this. It's what I do best. Let me introduce myself. My name is Pamela. I've been married for 3 years, and I'm a housewife now, but my life hasn't exactly been ordinary. Before I got married, I was a stage actress. Acting was my passion, and I was good at it. Being on stage made me feel alive. It was the kind of work that was rewarding and exciting every single day. I even had fans, and one of them was Luke, my now husband. Luke would come to every performance and watch me with starry-eyed admiration. He knew a member of my theater company, and through them, we got to know each other. Before long, we started dating and eventually got married. At first, Luke was wonderful, kind, loving, and totally devoted. His love for me was so overwhelming that it caught me off guard sometimes. "I did this because I love you, Pam, please understand," he would say whenever I felt uneasy. I'd give in because, well, I loved him too. I thought our marriage was going to be perfect, but life after the wedding wasn't what I imagined. The biggest problem was my mother-in-law. She didn't approve of my career as an actress. "If you're going to be a proper wife, you need to quit that frivolous job and focus on your home. Your most important job is to have children," she'd say. Under her pressure, Luke started siding with her. He hid my scripts, locked me out of the house if I came home late from practice, and constantly got in the way of my work. I begged him to let me keep acting, but he wouldn't listen. Eventually, I had to quit my job for the sake of my theater group, who didn't deserve to get dragged into my personal struggles. I decided to focus on being a housewife for now. I thought that if I had a child, it might stop my mother-in-law from constantly criticizing me. Then, once the baby was a little older, I could return to the work I loved. I wanted to have a child with Luke, too. But once I became a housewife, my mother-in-law's criticism only got worse. We lived just a 20-minute drive from my in-laws' house, and my mother-in-law, who had lost her husband a few years ago, visited us every day. Every time she came, she would eat leftovers without asking and complain that my cooking was too salty or over-seasoned. She'd open cabinets without permission, rummage through our things, and then criticize what she found. Back when I was a stage actress, going to work gave me joy and purpose. Now, as a housewife, I couldn't even find peace in my own home. My mother-in-law would interfere with everything I did, from morning to night, always finding something to complain about. The stress kept piling up. To make things worse, Luke, who was once so kind, started treating me coldly. "You're useless as a wife, just stay quiet, stay inside, and do the housework properly," he'd say, echoing his mother's insults. It hurt even more when my mother-in-law discovered that I had earned a good income before our marriage. She started demanding money from me regularly. "You've got money saved up, right? You don't even have time to spend it. Money's only valuable when you use it," she'd say, as if I owed her something. When I refused, she'd yell at me until the situation spiraled out of control. I felt pressured and had no choice but to give her money from my savings. It was infuriating to watch her spend my hard-earned money so carelessly. After just a year of marriage, my savings were. The money I gave my mother-in-law had added up to a huge amount. Around the same time, I discovered something even worse. Luke was having an affair with one of his coworkers. I found messages on his phone where they mocked me. One message said, "Pamela is so dumb. She'd never figure out what's going on between us." Luke had been sending texts like that to his lover, and it crushed me. That's when I seriously started thinking about divorce. Luckily, we didn't have any children, so it seemed like a good time to end things. But I hesitated because something exciting had come up. I'd been offered a small role in a play at my old theater company. I hadn't told Luke or my mother-in-law about it. Even after getting married, I kept in touch with my theater friends. They were my escape. the only thing keeping me sane. One of them, who had been listening to my struggles, asked if I wanted to perform in the show without telling anyone. The idea thrilled me. I missed being on stage so much that I didn't care if it was just a minor role. I said yes immediately. But if I filed for divorce now, it would create chaos and might interfere with rehearsals. This would be my first time performing in years, and I was determined to make it a success. I decided to wait until after the show to deal with the divorce. The performance was just a few days away. One day, everything seemed fine until my mother-in-law stormed into the kitchen, her eyes blazing with anger. "Pamela, what is this? Where did you get it?" "I found it in your bag." She held up flyers and scripts for the play I was secretly rehearsing for. "These are for a play, aren't they? You went through my bag? You can't do that," I said, stunned. "Don't change the subject. You said you quit acting. Explain this," she snapped. It was true, I had lied about working a part-time job so I could attend rehearsals, but that didn't give her the right to go through my things. As she began her usual rant, I couldn't hold back anymore. "So what? What's wrong with acting?" "Yes, I lied. I've been going to rehearsals," I yelled. "What, you admit it? You're just some amateur actress. You're pathetic, clinging to the stage like this," she spat back. Her words hit me like a punch, and I felt my anger boiling over. I may have lied, but what's wrong with doing what I love? Acting is my passion, it's what I've done all my life, it's even how I met your son, and yet, you forced me to give it up, bullied me every day, and took away the one thing that makes me happy. I've been handling all the housework while practicing for months, and neither you nor Luke even noticed. The show is the day after tomorrow, and no matter what you say, I'm going on stage. I said it all in one breath, trembling with anger. My mother-in-law stood there, speechless, her mouth hanging open. For me, acting is everything, and do you know what else? Stress is terrible for your health. Maybe the reason I can't have kids is because of the constant stress of dealing with you. Her face twisted in frustration, but she left without another word. The next day, I felt lighter, like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest. Rehearsal went better than ever, I was energized and ready for the show. That evening, I came home early, the day before the performance. As I stepped into the house, I heard Luke and my mother-in-law talking in the kitchen. They were so caught up in their conversation, they didn't notice me. "This will be the end of Pamela's acting career," my mother-in-law said, smirking. I froze. "And my career? What does that mean?" I thought, my heart racing. I crept closer and peeked into the kitchen. My mother-in-law was grinding nuts in a blender and adding them to the soup. I froze in horror. I'm severely allergic to nuts. Even a small amount causes my throat to swell, making it impossible to speak. I had told Luke about this when we were dating. Could they be trying to sabotage me so I wouldn't perform tomorrow? I quickly pulled out the voice recorder I carried for rehearsals and hit record. "It's finally going to happen tonight. This will teach her a lesson," my mother-in-law said with satisfaction. "She got so full of herself, talking back like that," Luke replied coldly. "If she'd just listened to you, Mom, none of this would have happened," he added. "She's hopeless, a terrible wife. She doesn't learn until we put her in her place," my mother-in-law said, laughing. I felt my chest tighten. Luke, the man I had trusted, was siding with his mother to harm me. Unable to bear it, I left the house, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't know where to go, but somehow, I found myself at the rehearsal hall. A few troupe members were practicing on their own. "Pamela, what are you doing here? Didn't you say you'd go home early today?" one of them asked. "Oh, yeah. I don't know," I mumbled. "Are you okay? You look upset. What's wrong?" Something inside me broke, and I told them everything, about the soup, the nuts, the cruel conversation I overheard. They listened quietly, their faces filled with shock and concern. "Pam, I have an idea. What do you think about turning the tables on them?" one of the troupe members asked. "What do you mean?" I replied, confused but intrigued. The troupe members explained their plan. As I listened, I felt a surge of determination. I decided to follow their suggestion. I was going to show Luke and my mother-in-law that I wasn't going to take their cruelty anymore. I came home later than usual and announced loudly, "I'm home." Immediately, my mother-in-law came up to me with a sweet, almost fake tone. "Pamela, I'm so sorry for yesterday. I didn't realize I was too harsh. Please forgive me. I thought you might be tired from your practice, so I made you dinner. Look, it's your favorite. Eat up and get ready for tomorrow's performance. There it was, the soup I had seen earlier. I was sure it had nuts crushed into it. I sat down at the table without saying anything. Thank you for the meal, I said calmly. It looks delicious. You're welcome. Mom really put a lot of care into it, Luke added, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. Their smiles were so fake, it was almost unbearable, but I didn't let it show. I pretended to eat the soup, mimicking swallowing it without actually doing so. Then, I dropped my spoon, grabbed my throat, and fell out of my chair, pretending to struggle for air. I acted like I was in horrible pain, just as if I had eaten the nuts. Luke panicked, rushing over to me with a glass of water. Pamela, are you okay? Here, drink some water, please. Can you drink it? His voice was full of worry. My mother-in-law looked horrified, hovering over me. Oh my God, I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to teach you a lesson. I just put a little bit of nuts in the soup, just a tiny bit. Luke shouted, Mom, stop talking, call an ambulance. No ambulance. What will the neighbors think if we get in trouble with the police? It was just a prank. What should we do now? I could hear everything they said, and then, I slowly stopped thrashing on the floor and stood up. I fixed my hair, looked at Luke, who was still in a panic, and calmly said, Pamela, are you okay? He asked, still uncertain. I'm fine, I replied, smiling. It was just an act, you know. What? You mean, you're not? I'm an actress, Luke. Acting is what I do. My mother-in-law's face turned bright red with embarrassment. Pamela, how dare you do this? Do you think it's okay to make fun of us like this? My mother-in-law yelled. It's you and your son who've been making fun of me, I shot back. You put nuts in my food to stop me from going on stage tomorrow. That's... Don't try to act innocent, I continued. I have proof. I pulled out a voice recorder from my bag. The screen showed it had been recording the whole time. And I have witnesses. Then, the members of my theater troupe stepped out from behind the door. They had followed me, just in case I needed support. Luke and my mother-in-law were frozen in place, shocked to see them. This is serious, my mother-in-law stammered. It was just a prank. Really, we're family, so forgive us, please. Family? I laughed. I've been acting my whole life, and you think I'd fall for this poor act? I know exactly how you feel about me. Do you seriously think I'll forgive you now? Keep dreaming. I held up the divorce papers. No way, Luke and my mother-in-law muttered, panic on their faces. I played back the recording and said, do you want to go to the police or sign the divorce papers? After that, Luke and I got divorced without any trouble. Since he'd also been having an affair, I asked for alimony. Luke had a hard time paying, and his lover eventually left him. Rumors about how he treated me spread at his workplace, and he was forced to resign. My ex-mother-in-law didn't stop interfering with my return to the stage. A troupe member caught her trying to sneak up on me at the back door and reported her to the police. Despite several warnings, she kept doing it, so a restraining order was put in place against her. Now, Luke is unemployed, and his mother's arrest made them the talk of the neighborhood. They live a miserable life, trying to stay out of the spotlight. As for me, I'm back on stage, doing what I love. I'm enjoying every moment, and I feel more free than ever. I'm not saying I'll never marry again, but for now, my true love is my work. Thanks for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.
Michael and his granddaughter Floriana took seats near the stage, giving them a close view of the models parading in beautiful festive dresses. 14-year-old Floriana was fond of fashion design and even attended a special school. In her dreams, the girl saw herself as a famous couturier, and her family, as it is supposed to, supported Floriana in her endeavours. So Michael had managed to get tickets to a show featuring a young fashion designer that Floriana adored. Upon hearing the news, Floriana exclaimed joyfully, "Really? You bought tickets?" Her mother Christy smiled at Michael and said, "Daddy, you are so good." Once again Michael felt like a hero. He would do anything for his daughter and grandchildren, including securing tickets to a fashion show. Floriana carefully prepared for the event, choosing her outfit and applying light makeup. Michael thought his granddaughter was beautiful without it, but he understood her desire to dress up and beautify herself. He had raised his daughter alone since she was 7 and knew girls liked to dress up. During the show, Floriana excitedly whispered to Michael, "Grandpa, Gloria Polono is coming out now." Gloria Polono? So the designer is a woman? Interesting to see my granddaughter's idol, Michael mused, relieved that it was a fashion designer, Floriana's role model, rather than the dazzling models showcasing the outfits. First, the models strutted onto the runway, smiling broadly at the audience. Then she appeared. Michael initially doubted his eyes, thinking his eyesight was deceiving him. He looked again. No, it's her, the orphan girl from my hometown. What a surprise! Oh, I wish I could get her autograph, Floriana sighed dreamily. We certainly will, Michael confidently asserted, taking his granddaughter's hand and making their way towards the stage. He was sure that Gloria would recognize him too. Michael used to see an elderly woman and a girl around 13 to 14 years old almost daily on his way home from work. He lived in a new suburban community, not far from a quiet, fading village. Most of the villagers who could afford to had long since moved away. Only the poor who couldn't afford a better place to live remained. Michael knew the elderly woman and the girl were from that village. Locals would often show up at the small farmers' market near the bus stop, selling their goods. Evidently, this grandmother and her granddaughter were doing their best to get by. Their makeshift counter displayed seasonal berries, vegetables and fruits, indicating that likely they had a vegetable garden. They were clearly familiar with the local forest's berry and mushroom spots. During winter, they mostly sold homemade pickles. Occasionally, they sold old items like books or toys, which the girl probably used to play with. Michael often noticed their homemade goods, including knit socks, scarves and hats. These colourful and stylish items were in high demand. Initially, Michael paid them no mind, having no need for homemade pies or pickles. However, one blustery day in mid-November, he found himself unable to drive past. The sight of the girl in her thin second-hand coat and the elderly woman shivering in the wind sparked a deep sympathy within him. He realized that only desperation could drive people to stand here in such harsh weather. Michael stopped the car next to a familiar couple and bought the rest of their goods, a couple of jars of pickles and strawberry jam, and a knitted scarf in a pink colour. The colour reminded him of his daughter Christy when she was a child. He bought the scarf, thinking his granddaughter Floriana might like it. She was only 2 at the time, but children grow up so quickly. "Are you really going to take all this?" the girl asked incredulously. Michael looked at her and felt a warmth in his heart. The frail girl reminded him of his own daughter Christy, who was similarly thin, wide-eyed and dark-haired. However, Christy had never worn such an old coat or worn-out boots. At 13, Michael's daughter studied hard, went out with friends, flew with her father to the sea. This girl's fate seemed much less fortunate. "Did you knit this?" Michael asked the elderly woman, pointing at the pink scarf. He wanted to lighten the tension a bit. "No, my granddaughter Gloria did it. She's got golden hands." "Wow," Michael winked at the girl. "You sure are talented." "Thank you," Gloria responded, a bit embarrassed but clearly pleased. That evening, Michael pulled a photo album off the shelf. His daughter Christy and Gloria looked similar. Christy was already an adult living in the capital. She studied economics there and found a job. Michael had once dreamed that Christy would take over his small dairy business, which he had built from scratch. But Christy had different plans. Michael didn't pressure Christy or try to change her mind. He understood that everyone has their own path. Christy was never particularly interested in this business and had a fiancé back in the capital. Fortunately, Donovan turned out to be a good man. Michael was naturally worried about his daughter's future and who she might encounter along the way, but his concerns were unfounded. Christy had a good judgment of character and chose a worthy husband. Her husband was kind, cheerful, caring and hard-working. Michael's worries eased when Christy introduced her fiancé to him. The young couple bought an apartment in the capital and both embarked on their individual careers, achieving success in their respective fields. A significant event then occurred in Michael's life. His granddaughter was born. The joy of the new grandfather was unparalleled. He put aside all his business in his hometown to meet his granddaughter. "Dad, why don't you sell your factory? It doesn't bring in much money anyway. If you move here, closer to us, it'll be better for everyone," Christy suggested. Michael, cradling his little granddaughter, was initially inclined to agree. However, he changed his mind as he considered the factory his brainchild and responsibility. He had invested so much effort, soul, time and energy into it that it pained him to think of passing it to someone else. He also felt a responsibility towards his staff. He couldn't predict the new owner's actions. They might even lay off all the workers. At that moment, Michael wasn't ready to let go of everything. Besides, he couldn't imagine living in the capital as a retiree. "Maybe later, when I'm old, decrepit and helpless," he said to his daughter, who understood and didn't pressure him further. Later on, Christy and Donovan had a son named Alan. Michael, overjoyed by his grandchildren, often visited his daughter's family, and they visited him in return. Being close to his loved ones and caring for his grandchildren brought him immense happiness. At first, Michael had doubts. Christy grew up without a mother. Could she give her children what she herself had not experienced? Motherly love, care and understanding. Christy had only ever had her father, Michael, who deliberately remained unmarried and didn't bring any women home, despite having some affairs. He didn't want Christy to have a stepmother. Having heard of many unfortunate stories, he believed it was unlikely for a woman unrelated to them to love his child sincerely and wholly. He never wanted Christy to feel discomfort, jealousy, or irritation, or to feel like an outsider. Michael was content with his own life. He and his daughter shared a close bond. Christy's mother, Laurie, was beautiful. She was an orphan and knew nothing about her relatives, and grew up in an orphanage. Michael met her at an amusement park, where they were both with their friends. The groups merged, resulting in a joyful and lively gathering. Michael was immediately drawn to the dark-haired, big-eyed girl, but he was shy, embarrassed to show her his feelings. Laurie herself understood everything, smiled encouragingly, asked some question, and that was it. The awkwardness was melted like snow in spring. At that time, Michael had not yet thought of his own dairy. He did not even aspire to such heights. He was yesterday's student, who worked in a design bureau for a mere salary, rented a tiny apartment, and everything suited him, in principle. Laurie, an orphan, lived in a small state-provided apartment. It was a disadvantaged neighbourhood. The girl was always afraid to return home alone. Well, Michael accompanied her, with pleasure, that very evening of acquaintance, and soon she moved in with him. Soon the couple got married, and Michael felt truly happy with Laurie, except that the man couldn't get away from the feeling that she didn't love him as much as he loved her. It showed in many ways, but Michael, falling in love with her, was ready to forgive her anything. Laurie always aspired to a beautiful life. She liked to dress up well, dine in cafes and restaurants, and dreamed of a car and travelling. It was for her sake that Michael started thinking about his own business. He decided to establish a dairy. Why such a business? Michael's grandfather used to work at such a factory, and he often took little Michael with him, so Michael knew from a young age how and what worked there. Initially, they needed money to start. Loans were taken, and all funds, as is typical in the early stages, were invested in the business. Michael was grateful for the help he received from friends and family who supported his plans. When the plant later started generating a stable profit, he didn't forget any of them. Laurie, however, was not content with their financial constraints at the very beginning. She desired immediate success and didn't believe in her husband's venture. By that time, they already had their daughter, Christy. Laurie often told Michael, "You're a loser. Nothing will work out for you. You're just wasting money." Michael tried to reassure her, presenting the promising prospects of their business and insisting they just needed to be patient. But Laurie didn't want to wait. And then one day, she left. Michael returned home from the office, where he often worked long hours during the business startup phase, to find a distraught Christy alone on the sofa. "Where's Mummy?" he asked, sensing something was amiss.
"She's gone to another city. She said we wouldn't see each other for a long time,"
Christy replied through her tears. Michael scooped up his daughter, holding her close, his heart pounding. A note on the dresser caught his eye. Laurie's farewell letter. She informed him that she had found a man, rich, successful, not a failure, and a loser like you, she wrote in her message. It turned out that this man had finished some business in the city and went to the other side of the country, to his homeland. And he took Laurie with him. "I deserve a better life," Laurie wrote. "You can't provide that for me. I've decided to start anew. Don't look for me. I leave our daughter with you, and I have already filed for divorce." It was evident that Laurie had carefully planned her departure. Despite the subsequent discussions about custody, Michael never understood why Laurie hadn't been honest with him. Why the need for deception? At first, little Christy missed her mother and waited for her. However, Michael never said anything bad about her. A mother is a mother. But as time passed, Christy adapted to her new life. She knew she had a mother somewhere, but her life had moved on, and it seemed there was no room for Laurie's presence. Michael made every effort to minimize Christy's suffering from her mother's absence. He showered her with attention and strove to be a friend to her, nurturing a warm and trusting relationship. The difficulties he faced were not about household chores, as he quickly learned to braid hair, iron dresses, cook, and maintain a clean home. His apprehension lay in the enormity of his task as a man raising a girl. He feared he might not be up to the challenge. However, life proved his fears unwarranted. Christy grew up to be a successful, beautiful, and responsible woman, and an exceptional mother. Everything turned out well. After that first short conversation with the grandmother and the granddaughter, Michael never passed by them again. Whenever he saw them, he would stop, purchase something, and overpay, despite their protests. He realized they truly needed assistance.
"You spoil us,"
said the elderly lady.
"God bless you."
"I can afford it, especially since I can't live without your pickles." Indeed, Michael genuinely loved the old woman's pickles and pies. The pickles were surprisingly soft and flavorful, and such pies couldn't be found in any bakery. Michael was also fond of the items Gloria knitted: socks, scarves, hats. When she learned that Michael had grandchildren, Gloria started knitting adorable things for Floriana and Alan. Christy admired them, and Michael never failed to bring these gifts to the capital. "Does such a young girl create all of this?" Christy used to ask. "I can hardly believe it myself," Michael smiled. "She's talented." "Yes, you're right, Dad. That girl is incredibly talented." Eventually, Michael learned a lot about the lives of Gloria and her grandmother. Both had endured tough times, which was immediately apparent. They lived in a small house in a neighbouring village, with a sagging roof and squeaky floors. Everything in the house needed repair, but there was no money, and they were physically drained. They managed to survive, patching up wallpapers and filling in wall cracks. Every morning, Gloria went to school with a neighbour, an elderly man who worked in the district centre where the school was located. Since his workplace and Gloria's school were on the same route, it was convenient for both. However, Gloria returned home on her own. After a quick lunch, she and her grandmother would go to the market to sell goods. The grandmother would prepare the goods before Gloria's return from school. In the evening, they would return home. While the grandmother prepared dinner, Gloria would sit down to study. Although she found studying difficult, especially after a long day of trading. The girl never let her grandmother sell goods alone. She knew it would be hard for her, and she felt sorry for her. In her rare spare time, Gloria knitted, a skill taught by her grandmother. Gloria had been fascinated by knitting since she was 5. She admired her grandmother's deft handiwork, producing beautiful items like socks, vests, and scarves. Intrigued, and considering it magical, little Gloria asked her grandmother to teach her knitting. Her grandmother, thinking it would be a fleeting interest, taught her, but to her surprise, Gloria learned quickly and developed a love for it. Starting with knitting for her dolls, Gloria progressed to creating real items for people. By the age of 10, Gloria had become an expert knitter, able to create items both quickly and skillfully. The grandmother was particularly amazed by her granddaughter's imagination. The girl created unique models, original patterns, and invented her own knitting techniques. Her creations were unique and unlike anything else. The neighbours also praised the girl. One day, a friend of her grandmother suggested selling Gloria's creations. On the first day, everything sold out. It was a huge success. From then on, Gloria knitted for sale when she had time. However, she could only knit a lot during the holidays because her regular schedule was packed with studies. Her grandmother emphasized the importance of education and dreamt of seeing Gloria as a nurse or an economist. Gloria, on the other hand, wanted to be a designer and create interesting clothing models. She even sketched out her designs for dresses, coats, and accessories across several notebooks. However, the elderly lady viewed these ambitions as mere fantasies. She saw the profession of a designer as unreliable. "Where will you find a job afterwards?" she would ask Gloria, who could only shrug in response. Over time, Gloria began to believe that her grandmother was right. She started to think it was better to choose a more stable and down-to-earth profession rather than chase unattainable dreams. "You are almost an orphan," the grandmother often told her. "I won't be around forever. I'm already old. You must stand on your own 2 feet. Your grades won't get you into nursing or economics. Consider becoming a cook or a hairdresser. You'll earn money. There is no one you can rely on, so you must plan for your future." Yes, Gloria was an orphan. Once she had a mother, the beautiful and carefree Megan. Megan was raised without a father, who drowned saving a neighbour's property from a flood. She was less than a year old at the time, so her mother raised her alone, providing for her needs, but not having the time or energy for warmth or tenderness. She didn't want to study. She didn't want to work at home either. She had only one care: to go out with friends and girlfriends. The mother scolded, tried to punish, but to no avail. The girl grew up and stopped obeying at all. Mother and daughter frequently fought, and each argument would end the same way. Megan would storm out of the house, seeking refuge with her friends, who were always willing to provide shelter. Eventually, Megan and 2 other girls ran away from home to the city, hoping to start anew. However, they lacked a solid plan. Her mother looked for her, even got the police involved, but to no avail. Well, they found her, brought her home, and Megan ran away again the next morning. Well, you can't keep someone chained up or watch them every minute. Megan's distraught mother held on to the hope that her daughter would eventually realize the harsh realities of city life, the necessity to work for sustenance, and the difficulty of finding respectable employment without an education. She believed life would teach Megan these lessons. However, things didn't turn out as hoped. Young Megan quickly found admirers who provided for her, leading her down a path to nowhere. As she descended into this abyss, her mother could only watch helplessly. News about Megan's life reached her mother through the children of neighbours, who had also moved to the city and occasionally spotted Megan. The mother herself occasionally visited her daughter, bringing food and money, each time noting with a heavy heart how her daughter appeared increasingly unkempt and frail. Megan hung out a lot, and this could not but reflect on her appearance. Dishevelled hair, swollen face, unhealthy thinness, and some alien voice, cocking hoarse. There was no trace of Megan's former tenderness and beauty. Her mother tried to organise her daughter in the hospital, offered a way out of a difficult situation, never tired of repeating that she would always be near, help, support. She constantly asked her to come back. "You're asking me to go back to this hole of ours? No way," smirked Megan. "I'm not going back there. It's better here. It's more fun. It's real life here." Megan's real life involved constant drinking and hanging out with marginal friends. Naturally, her mother blamed herself for her daughter's situation. She believed she had failed to provide a proper upbringing, having spent 24 hours at work with the assumption that Megan would grow up to be a good person on her own. Now, she felt she had missed out. This guilt weighed heavily on the woman's soul. She tried to fix everything, to change, but more and more clearly realized that she could not do it. One evening, a neighbour arrived at her house unexpectedly. Her daughter worked as a nurse at the local maternity hospital. "You've got a granddaughter," the neighbour announced from the doorstep. "A granddaughter? I visited Megan a few months ago, and she didn't appear pregnant." "Your granddaughter was born prematurely, but she's surprisingly healthy, and your Megan wants to give the baby up. Maybe you could take her in. It's not right if the baby ends up in an orphanage." The next morning, the shocked grandmother visited the maternity hospital. The head doctor made it clear that her granddaughter would not be given to her so easily. The age was considerable, the conditions were unsuitable, and she advised her to influence Megan. However, the new mother flatly refused. "Why do I need these problems? What kind of mother am I?" Megan was right. Entrusting the baby to her wasn't an option. "A baby brings benefits, financial ones at least. You'll get money for it." "But I'll have to spend money on the baby. Diapers, formula, medicine, plus the constant crying, cleaning up after her, feeding her over and over again. It's not a good deal." "Megan, let me take the girl. Officially she'll be yours, but I'll raise her until you're ready. Is that okay with you?" Megan's mother had already seen her granddaughter and even held her in her arms. Her heart was completely won over by this tiny, warm bundle with a cute snub nose and long eyelashes. She couldn't bear the thought of the baby ending up in a state facility. How would she be treated there? What fate awaited the girl? Especially as a premature baby, she needed special care. Megan agreed to let her daughter stay with her mother. "If you want her that much, take her, but don't count on my help. I don't need a baby right now." Megan left the hospital and continued her life. The girl, named Gloria by her grandmother, stayed with her. With Gloria's arrival, her grandmother's life changed, becoming brighter and more meaningful. Caring for Gloria was no easy task, but it brought great joy to her grandmother. Whenever she felt tired, a glance at Gloria's clear eyes, her smile, or her gentle voice would instantly alleviate her worries, filling her heart with joy and warmth. Life was challenging for both of them. Megan received a child allowance, a small payment for keeping Gloria in the family, instead of sending her to an orphanage. The grandmother's salary was modest, and she couldn't work as much as before, since Gloria was still a baby. Despite these hardships, she never complained. Gloria's presence made her happier and stronger. The woman hoped Megan would mature. Occasionally she would show up at her mother's small village house for a visit, as if to visit Gloria, but in reality she came to eat, sleep, and endure another challenging period. Gloria didn't inspire affection in Megan. In fact, she found her own daughter difficult to tolerate. She was bothered by Gloria's chatter, frequent crying, and constant demands. Nevertheless, there was hope that maternal feelings would eventually surface in Megan, perhaps when Gloria was a bit older. And then, the irreparable happened. Megan died. There was a fire in the apartment, where there was another party. The wooden building located on the city's outskirts was engulfed in flames. None of the intoxicated occupants survived, though the sober neighbours managed to escape. Thus Gloria became an orphan. Her mother was gone, and her father's identity and whereabouts were unknown. In reality, not much had changed in Gloria's life, because she had lived without her mother before. For her grandmother, however, the hope that everything would eventually be fine had died. From then on, the grandmother and granddaughter lived together, scrimping and saving, always trying to earn an extra penny. They seemed to be managing well enough, even though it required significant effort from both of them. Having learned about their story, Michael felt an increased respect and sympathy for them. He assisted them by continuing to purchase their goods and offering them money, knowing they were saving up to repair their decaying home. He could have easily paid for the repairs and genuinely wanted to, but pride, or embarrassment, prevented the grandmother and granddaughter from accepting his offer. The elderly woman always declined the money. "We'll manage, Michael, don't worry. You're already helping us a lot. We're not that helpless or destitute. We're fine." One day, while returning home from town, Michael saw an unusual scene. Only Gloria was standing at the counter, her grandmother nowhere in sight. Michael stopped his car and approached Gloria, who had matured from an awkward teenager into a beautiful young woman. "Wow, it's only been 3 years. Kids grow up so fast," he suddenly thought to himself. "Hey, why are you all alone? Where's your grandma?" "She's sick." "Is it something serious?" Michael worried. "Maybe she needs medicine. Did you call a doctor?" "It's like a cold or something. She's got a bad cough. Her neighbour made her a herbal infusion. It should help." "If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me. You have my phone number?" Michael offered. "Okay," Gloria promised. "Thank you so much." "Let me take your stuff, and you can go home to your grandmother. Do you need a ride?" "No, thanks. It's not far. I'll walk." Michael left on a business trip the next day. He was gone for about a month, and upon his return, he was swamped with work at the plant, working day and night in the office. One day, while driving past the place where Gloria and her grandmother usually shopped, he noticed their absence. He didn't think much of it at the time. After all, they weren't there every day, and perhaps they had already finished their work. However, when Gloria and her grandmother didn't appear the following day, or even the day after, Michael began to worry. He hadn't realized how attached he had become to the old woman and the girl. They were no longer strangers to him, but people he cared about. Sincere, grateful, decent, good and simple. Their well-being had become important to him. The man knew which village Gloria and her grandmother lived in, and even had a rough idea of their house's location. Gloria had described it as on the village outskirts next to a large oak tree, with an abandoned house nearby. Based on these clues, he didn't anticipate difficulty finding their humble abode. As expected, Michael found the small, run-down house, without much trouble. Despite never having visited before, he knew where to go and what to look for, thanks to Gloria's and her grandmother's descriptions. He knocked loudly on the gate but received no response. The gate was unlocked, so he pushed it gently and approached the house. It was in dire need of repair, and its condition was worse than he'd imagined. The man chastised himself mentally for not visiting Gloria and her grandmother earlier. He should have fixed this dilapidated place long ago. The house door was locked, and the shutters were closed, with no one responding to his knocks. Michael decided to ask the neighbours about Gloria and her grandmother. He had a bad feeling about the situation. The house across the street seemed inhabited, as laundry was drying on a line and smoke was trickling from the chimney. He decided to seek help from these neighbours. An elderly woman, still robust, quick-eyed and energetic, opened the door. "Hello," Michael said. "I'm looking for my acquaintances who live here, a girl named Gloria and her grandmother." "And who are you?" asked the elderly woman, suspiciously furrowing her eyebrows. "I'm not quite sure how to explain. A friend, I suppose, or perhaps a regular customer. Gloria, her grandmother, and I see," the woman nodded. "You're Michael. Gloria and Anna have spoken highly of you. You're a good man. So what brings you here?" "Well, I was away, and when I returned, they weren't around. They're usually out selling their goods, but they've disappeared. I thought I'd check in case something was wrong. Maybe they need some help." "So, you're unaware," the elderly woman said, shaking her head with a hint of sadness. "Gloria mentioned she lost your phone number accidentally. She wanted to call you when it happened." "What happened?" "Anna, Gloria's grandmother, fell ill. She had a bad cough and was weak. We initially thought it was a cold and treated her with herbal remedies, but her condition worsened. We called a doctor and discovered it was her heart causing the cough. Polly was taken to a city hospital, and even the doctors couldn't help her. She passed away." The news of her grandmother's death was a massive blow to Gloria. She was not herself. We all empathized with her, supporting her as best we could. All the neighbors understood what losing her grandmother, who had raised her, meant to Gloria. Money for the funeral was collected by everyone. After the funeral, Gloria reflected on her future. She had no desire to remain in her small, crumbling house in the tiny village, where she had lived only for her grandmother. Having completed only school, she recognized the need for further education to avoid wasting a year. Gloria needed advice from a seasoned, life-wise adult. She considered reaching you, Michael, but you had disappeared, and she had lost your phone number. She speculated that you might have moved to the capital to be with your daughter and grandchildren, as your daughter had long been urging you to do. Following this train of thought, Gloria decided to move to the capital city. "There are more opportunities there. I'll find my way," Gloria said to us, and all we could do is wish her the best. We were concerned for Gloria, who had spent her whole life in this remote village and was unfamiliar with the wider world. However, we also understood that our dwindling village offered little for a young woman. She needed to forge her own path, build a career, and stand on her own 2 feet. After taking the remaining money, which was very little, Gloria left for the station early in the morning with a light backpack on her shoulders. That was the last time she was seen in the village. "Probably she's doing well in the city," mused an elderly neighbour. "Ah, Gloria, she's good, responsible, mature. She has her head on straight. Or maybe something happened to her. I don't know, but she never came back." Michael gave the neighbour his phone number, asking her to call him at any time if Gloria suddenly returned. He felt a sense of responsibility for this sweet, naive and vulnerable girl. The neighbour was right. Anything could have happened to Gloria in the capital. She was inexperienced in life and unfamiliar with people. How could a young girl survive alone in such a large metropolis full of human predators? Michael regretted giving the girl his phone number without asking for hers in return. As it turned out, the neighbours also didn't have her number. Years passed. Michael eventually moved to the capital to live with his daughter, sold his house in his hometown, and handed over his business to capable hands. The business had been struggling and Michael couldn't keep up. A young, energetic entrepreneur seemed to be the right person to restore the dairy business to its former state. Michael carefully chose the successor for his business, and the selling price was not his main concern. Michael bought an apartment near his daughter's house in a charming new neighbourhood. There was a park with a picturesque pond nearby, and Michael loved to visit it with his grandchildren, Floriana and Alan. Initially, Michael considered finding a job. However, with his daughter and son-in-law absorbed in their careers, and their children left with a nanny, he found too strict. Michael decided to care for his grandchildren. This decision brought him immense joy after being apart from his family for so long. Thankfully, Michael's substantial sum of money from his business job meant he didn't need to work. Thus, he devoted his time to his grandchildren. His daily routine included waking them up, feeding them, driving them to and from the school, helping with homework, and accompanying them to extracurricular activities. Floriana was into dance and design, while Alan enjoyed chess and karate. He also regularly took them to contests, tournaments, competitions, and children's parties. When Michael asked how Christy coped without him, she replied, "We were like hamsters on a wheel. Now we can work in peace. Thank you, Daddy. You're a tremendous help." Michael enjoyed being a necessary part of his daughter and her husband's life, and he cherished his time with his grandchildren. They had developed a warm, friendly relationship. Michael seemed to understand his grandchildren better than their parents did, knowing what they wanted, understanding their moods, and offering support when needed. Time passed quickly, and Michael watched with a hint of sadness as his grandchildren grew up. Floriana and Alan would soon be independent. Michael wished time could be slowed down, even if just for a while. Floriana continued her passion for design, and Michael sometimes saw a reflection of Gloria in her. The man often wondered about Gloria's life now. Michael noticed a fashion show announcement while walking home from the store. The poster on a pole near the bus stop advertised a young coutureur's fashion show at a nearby concert hall. Michael knew Floriana would be interested in it and decided to buy tickets. He managed to secure the best seats near the stage, ensuring a memorable experience for his granddaughter. His 14-year-old granddaughter was overjoyed. "Grandpa, you're the best! This is such a fantastic show. But it's going to end late and I have school in the morning. Perhaps I can convince your parents to let you miss a day." At this suggestion, Floriana affectionately hugged her grandfather, then jumped and clapped her hands joyously. Despite her age, she sometimes exhibited the emotional exuberance of a child, a trait that her grandfather Michael adored. They spent the evening at the fashion show, where Floriana, with a keen eye, scrutinized the models' costumes and shared her professional opinions with Michael. He was proud of his granddaughter's insight and knew she was destined for success. Towards the end of the event, a young woman who was strikingly similar to Gloria, a poor orphan girl Michael had known, took the stage. The more Michael studied her face, the more he became convinced it was Gloria. The name matched too. Such coincidences were rare. Michael promised Floriana that they would get Gloria's autograph, which excited Floriana so much she clapped her hands again. Soon they were navigating through the crowd towards Gloria, who was radiating joy. Michael gave her a bouquet that he and Floriana had prepared. As Gloria looked at Michael, recognition flashed in her eyes. For a moment, her smile faded, and her eyebrows arched in surprise. She stared at Michael, clearly recalling their past encounter. Gloria leaned towards Michael over the hum of the crowd and asked him to wait at the 5th exit from the hall. Michael nodded, took Floriana's hand, and positioned himself at the specified exit. "Grandpa, do you even know her?" Floriana exclaimed, barely containing her joy. "Is she really coming up to us?" Gloria didn't come in person. Instead, she sent an assistant. The young man guided Michael and Floriana into the dressing room where they met Gloria. She looked radiant, delighted with her success, and slightly weary. Gloria approached Michael, locked eyes with him and smiled. "Michael, is it really you?" "I could ask the same. Gloria, is it you?" he responded. "That's me," Gloria nodded. "And this young lady, is she your granddaughter, Floriana?" Floriana was taken aback upon hearing her name uttered by the star. The idea of her idol knowing her name was mind-boggling. "Wow, you remember my granddaughter's name?" Michael was astonished. "Well, how could I not? I designed many children's outfits because of this girl, whom I haven't even met once. And overall, you've had a significant influence on my life and my choices." "How?" Michael queried. "Well, first you helped me and my grandmother. You helped us out a lot. Looking at you, I wanted to be as strong, rich, and kind. I wanted to help someone too, and now I have organized a fund to help children from poor families and orphanages, like I was myself many years ago. We help them find themselves in life, help them not to go down the wrong path. In general, we support them as much as we can. You're an excellent person. I don't even have words. By the way, you're the one who made me believe in myself. My clothes, well, the ones I knitted, they were also praised by my neighbours. But you were the only one who said I was talented, that I'd be great. You really believed in me. You can't even imagine how it helped me in life. I really followed my dream and I achieved my dream. I had a little bit of luck there too, but if I had done nothing, nothing would have happened. And I did not give up, including thanks to your words, because of your faith in me. It was like wings behind my back, an invisible support. Gloria, I was looking for you and your grandmother. I came back from a business trip and you were gone. I went to the village and found your house. The neighbours said what had happened to your grandmother and that you had gone to the capital and disappeared completely. That's precisely what happened, Gloria nodded. Why should I have stayed there? I needed your advice at that moment, but I lost the phone number you gave me accidentally. So, I suppose you could say, I ended up nowhere. Are you going to tell us what happened afterward? Michael asked. Of course. I didn't think we'd ever meet again. You can't imagine how excited I am about this meeting. Me neither. I'm delighted too. I mean, I've been remembering you, thinking about you, worrying about you. And now I see a successful young woman in front of me. You realized your talent after all. Yes, I did realize it all in the end. Have a seat. And you, Floriana, sit down. Gloria gestured towards the soft leather sofa in the corner. My story is not short. After her grandmother's funeral, Gloria moved to the capital. With little money and some savings, plus a bit of help from her neighbours, she managed to rent a small room in an old 2-story house near the train station. She then set out to pursue an education. Gloria did not consider prestigious economic and law colleges, instead opting for something similar. She initially thought of becoming a chef or a pastry chef, but fate had other plans. Gloria stumbled upon an ad for an apprentice tailor position at a studio, which promised a certificate at the end of the course and even offered some salary. After some consideration, Gloria decided to take a chance. The studio's owner, Mrs. Jansen, took a liking to her bright student. Often praising her and using her as a role model for other employees, Mrs. Jansen even increased Gloria's salary due to her performance and creativity. Gloria handled the most intricate orders, adjusted clothes to fit perfectly, and expertly repaired even noticeable tears. Most importantly, she always had innovative ideas to improve dresses, suits, and trousers. Gloria had some money. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to rent a better apartment and even save a little. Mrs. Jansen, aware of her young employee's circumstance, advised and cared for her. Then, Gloria fell in love for the first time. She was so in love with Tyler, a part-time loader at a nearby store, that she lost her head. Tyler was a tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed man with a wide smile and strong hands. He approached Gloria first, complimenting her and asking her name. I like you a lot. I've been watching you for a long time. You're a beautiful girl, and you seem kind. A rare combination these days. Gloria, looking into his bright blue eyes, melted at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. It was delightful to be liked, especially by such a handsome and charming guy. Tyler accompanied Gloria to the bus stop that evening, and the next day he approached her again, talking to her as if they were old friends. Gloria was happy. She waited for Tyler to appear again, just as she had hoped. As they got to know each other, Gloria learned that Tyler, like her, was from a remote village. However, he came from a large, poor family. He moved to the city to earn money and help his mother raise his younger siblings. He sent almost all of his earnings to his family and lived in a cheap hostel. Gloria found this very noble. After Tyler's revelation, her affection for him grew. He seemed reliable and responsible, an ideal life partner due to his commitment to his family. Soon she invited Tyler to move in with her. There was no need for him to stay in a hostel. She relished every moment they spent together, glad to no longer be alone. Tyler showered Gloria with care and warmth. They spent a lot of time together, discussing every topic under the sun. Before long, she considered him her closest and dearest. However, Mrs. Jansen did not share the same sentiment. "He seems insincere and slippery," she commented. "He's a good man," argued Gloria. "Yesterday I came home from work and he prepared dinner and washed the floors." "It's not a hard thing to do," Mrs. Jansen argued. "It feels like he's gaining your trust. Be careful with him." Unfortunately, Mrs. Jansen's suspicions proved correct. One day, Gloria returned home to find Tyler and his belongings gone, along with her money box. She had been saving up for her own place, and despite Mrs. Jansen's advice to deposit her savings in a bank, she had kept them at her home. Tyler knew about the money because Gloria had told him. She didn't hide anything from him, and he exploited her trust. So it happened that he never truly loved her. He merely exploited the kindness and naivety of a young girl. He lived in her apartment, ate at her expense, and then vanished with a substantial sum of money. "It's all right, dear," Mrs. Jansen comforted the sobbing Gloria. "It's good that he left on his own. You should steer clear of such people. Consider the lost money as payment for a life lesson. From now on, be more cautious about who you let in." Gloria found herself in a precarious financial situation. She had to pay 6 months' worth of rent, plus expenses for food, clothing and utilities. Her savings were depleted. Everyday activities and good service helped distract her from the pain caused by the deceitful Tyler. It was also challenging to accept that the man she loved was just a common swindler. In this challenging moment, she remembered her old way of earning money. She resumed knitting and sewing items and started selling them in the local market for craftsmen. She desperately needed the money. And then, Gloria glanced at her silent listeners and smiled. And then, as the saying goes, when one door closes, another opens. As it turned out, Tyler did me a favour. If it hadn't been for him, I would never have gone to the market with my things, and Paul would never have noticed me. Gloria, already aware that her creations were unique and popular, didn't pay much attention to the stylishly dressed young man scrutinizing her goods. It wasn't unusual for her creations to attract interest, and this man was no exception. He bought a couple of scarves and a decorative headband, paying more than the asking price, which pleased Gloria. The following evening he returned, this time accompanied by an elegant middle-aged woman. They were Eleanor and Paul, mother and son, and owners of a famous fashion house in the capital. They offered Gloria a job, promising a significantly higher salary and promising prospects. "That's how I got lucky," Gloria said. "Not just lucky," Michael replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "You've been working towards this all your life, since you were a child." "Well, maybe so," agreed Gloria. She had achieved her dream job, creating unique clothes for clients' requests. Her designs were showcased by runway models, and critics unanimously praised her work. The success was dizzying and exhilarating. Gloria relished in the creative process and earned a substantial income from it. Soon, she was able to fulfill a long-held dream of buying an apartment in the capital. Now a renowned fashion designer, her designs were showcased globally and worn by celebrities. Gloria successfully established her own popular brand. She had a loving husband and 2 sons. She was both happy and successful. "I'm proud of you," Michael said with affection. Floriana, meanwhile, gaped at her idol. Hearing this success story was clearly inspiring for her. "I I'm thrilled we met. Gloria smiled. You are one of the people I wanted to personally thank. You've been a great help to me. You've showed me the importance of being kind and strong in this life. And you gave me confidence in my talent. That's been very supportive. By the way, would you like to meet my family? I've told my husband a lot about you. With great pleasure. Michael and Floriana responded in unison. A middle-aged man with silver at his temples packed a little broom and rags into a large bag, filled an empty 5-litre bottle with tap water, and headed towards the door. In the hallway, a boy sat on a banquette. The child's flushed cheeks and sniffling nose were not left unnoticed by the man, and he asked, "Tucker, wouldn't you rather stay home? There's nothing wrong with it. You can sit and watch cartoons. I'll be back quickly. If you don't want to be alone, I can ask Leslie to stay with you, or call Haley to look after you." A blush spread across the boy's cheeks, a usual sign of his excitement, and he firmly replied, "No, I must go to my mum." The boy grabbed the cane by the door, stood up from the banquette, and just as he was opening the door, turned to his father, warning in a stern tone, "And don't let Leslie come to my mother's. She doesn't belong there." The man frowned. Leslie had already texted him that she was waiting in the parking lot nearby. This was the last thing he needed. Now he would have to explain things to her. Limping slightly and leaning on a cane, the boy headed for the elevator. He pressed the button and asked, "Dad, can we go to the market to buy some seedlings? I want to get fresh flowers for Mum." "Of course, son. We'll definitely stop by," his father responded. A door slammed behind them, and they were joined by a neighbour. The woman, dressed in a light summer sundress, greeted them and inquired, "Are you heading to Doreen's? That's right, it's her birthday today, isn't it?" The man nodded. "Yes, Haley, we're heading to Doreen's. We'll pick up some flowers and go straight there. We want to be back before the city gets too hot." "Nate," the woman proposed, "if you'd like, you can leave Tucker with me. I also wanted to visit Doreen, but a little later." The boy shook his head dejectedly, and, accepting his point of view, the woman did not insist on her own. She gently stroked Tucker's head, looked at his father, and was about to speak when the elevator doors opened. Lastly, in line with the rules, the boy entered the elevator. In the confined elevator space, the conversation faded like a fire deprived of oxygen. Once outside, under the already scorching summer sun, everyone silently went their separate ways. Hallie headed towards the supermarket on the ground floor, while her neighbours made their way to the parking lot. Near the car, where Nate and Tucker were headed, a delicate young woman stood wearing light, wide trousers, a baggy t-shirt, and a baseball cap adorned with the logo of a well-known rock band. Beside the car was a box of plants. The man opened the car, but the boy didn't rush to get in. Instead, he grabbed his father's hand and spoke loudly enough for the woman to hear. "I'm not going with her to see Mum. She should leave. I don't want to see her. And all her flowers can go with her. I'd rather pick flowers for my Mum," Tucker exclaimed. "Tucker, how can you behave like this?" The man tried to object. "Leslie has prepared and made an effort, yet you're acting rudely. You're an adult. Think, maybe we can all go together." The boy, leaning on his cane, with his head bowed low, repeated, "I won't go to see Mum with her. I'd rather take the bus. But you can do whatever you want." Tucker then turned to leave for the bus stop. Quickly reacting, Leslie called out, "Tucker, wait, don't go. Nate, Tucker is probably right. I shouldn't come with you. I'll leave the plants here, as I can't take them home across town. Do what you want with them. I have to go now. Tucker, I apologise if my presence offended you. Nate, call me when you're free." Leslie wanted to kiss the man, at least on one cheek, but noticing Tucker's stern look, she decided against showing her affection. Nate helped his son get into the back seat, then got behind the wheel, and they carefully exited the parking lot. The cityscape began to flicker outside the window. Despite the early hour, the streets were already bustling with cars. Many were seeking an escape from the city into nature. Near the plant market, at the city exit, Nate pulled over and offered, "Tucker, shall I buy the flowers myself? It might be hard for you to walk, right?"
"No, I'll go,"
Tucker replied stubbornly.
"I want to pick the flowers for my mum myself."
Slowly, Tucker walked along the rows of stalls, leaning on a stick. He looked a bit like an old man, except for his beautiful chestnut hair. Despite the numerous offers from vendors showcasing their flowers, the boy remained focused. Nate walked beside him, suppressing the urge to make suggestions. Eventually, Tucker stopped near an elderly woman. He greeted her and asked,
"Excuse me, could you recommend some flowers that don't need frequent watering? They should be beautiful and blooming. They're for my mum, and I want her to like them."
The florist started asking about the soil type on the plot, how often watering could be done, and what types of flowers the woman liked. Tucker lowered his head and didn't answer. Nate approached the elderly woman and whispered almost inaudibly, ensuring his son couldn't hear, "We need very hardy plants. We'll be planting them in a cemetery." The elderly woman, trying to hide her emotions, stopped asking questions and started suggesting options. Tucker picked out 5 pots and the seller carefully placed them in a cardboard box. Nate tried to pay, but his son was quicker. He took money from his pocket and handed it to the woman who was giving planting instructions. "When you plant, first moisten the hole well, then remove the plants from the pot and place them in the hole. Cover with soil, press down and water again." The man thanked the saleswoman, took the box and started walking slowly ahead. Tucker, with tears welling up in his eyes, followed his father. Soon, the man and the boy stood before the grave of the beloved woman and mother. A pretty young woman was looking at them from the picture. She had lived too briefly, and the unfairness of it all stung both Tucker and his father. The grave was still new, with the earth not yet fully settled, making it too early to think about a gravestone. However, the woman's final resting place was already enclosed by a beautiful wrought iron lattice where a wreath was attached. Overwhelmed with despair, the man sighed deeply. Tucker broke the silence, whispering, "Hello, Mother. I'm sorry it took me so long to come." The father and son, mourning their loss, planted flowers on the grave, stood in silence for a few minutes, and then slowly walked back to their car. Their spirits were low. Nate suggested stopping at a fast food joint, but Tucker declined, saying he wasn't in the mood for anything. In mid-August, Nate informed his son of an important decision he had made. "Tucker," he began, "we need help right now. You need supervision when I'm on a business trip. I don't want to keep troubling Cynthia. She has her own life, and my constant requests may make her uncomfortable. She's too polite to say anything about it. Luckily, we have another option. I've started a relationship with Leslie. I know you don't like her, but it's been decided. We're moving in together." The boy had probably intuitively realized this was coming a long time ago, but he still couldn't contain his displeasure.
"You traitor!"
he yelled, his cheeks flushed with intense emotion.
"You've betrayed Mum. I don't want you to be with that Leslie. She's nasty and disgusting, just like green sticky snot. She's only interested in your apartment and your salary. I bet she'll try to send me to an orphanage."
After these words, Tucker, a resilient little fighter who had bravely endured his mother's loss and numerous complicated surgeries, broke down in tears. The thought of being unwanted by his own father was too much for him. He had experienced too many hardships in the past year. Nate was taken aback. His son hadn't cried this loudly, even at his mother's funeral, and he didn't know how to comfort him. He sat down next to Tucker on the sofa, held his sobbing boy tightly, and fought back his own tears. Why was fate so cruel to them? They had a good family life, never argued, and enjoyed their time together. They even planned to get Tucker a dog for his 8th birthday. However, a tragic accident shattered everything. While Nate was away, his wife and son went to a ski base outside the city. His wife, Doreen, sent him beautiful photos to share their joy. But about an hour after receiving the last photo, their happiness was abruptly ended. A stranger called from his wife's number to inform him about a car accident. Only Nate's formidable driving let him carefully park the multi-ton vehicle on the curb without another car accident. The man spent several minutes pounding his hands on the steering wheel because the news he had just received seemed deadly horrible. He half expected to wake up from this nightmare or receive a call from his wife, Doreen, reminding him to drive carefully. But the expected miracle never occurred. Doreen had died, and their son Tucker was severely injured. According to the doctor's cautious predictions, Tucker's recovery would be a lengthy process. On that dreadful December day, once he grasped the reality of the situation, Nate contacted his boss, explained the circumstances, and requested someone to pick up his cargo. He needed to return home as soon as possible to arrange the funeral and provide support for his injured son. Nate's parents had passed away, and Doreen herself had grown up in an orphanage. In those initial hours, their neighbour Haley was the only one available to look after Tucker in the hospital. Upon hearing about Doreen's death from Nate, Haley rushed to the hospital to see the child she had known since he was born. Tucker was deeply affected by the loss of his mother, because it was he who tried to persuade his mother not to leave him, but the woman died in his arms before the ambulance arrived. Haley, a neighbour and close friend of dead Doreen, took a week off work to help her friend's family. It was she who, in the terrible days, filled with especially acute grief, ordered Nate not to give up because he had to take care of the child. It was almost impossible to do it alone. At that time, Nate faced a dilemma. If he continues to go for truck journeys, there will be no one to help Tucker with his rehabilitation, and if he stays with him, there will be no money to live on. Sometimes Nate struggled to recognize his own son. Tucker would become deeply introspective or overly anxious, immediately becoming upset if things didn't go as planned. The idea of a new marriage for the widower was suggested by Haley, a neighbour who, one evening, 3 months after the tragedy, brought over some pies. Once she ensured that Tucker was in the other room wearing headphones, she initiated a serious conversation with Nate. "Don't immediately reject what I'm about to say. Just listen and consider my idea. I know you loved Doreen. It's impossible not to. I miss her too. She was my rock through every sorrow and joy, which makes it even harder. Let me be blunt. Doreen wouldn't want you struggling between work and caring for Tucker all by yourself. You can't do it all alone. So, I'll just say it now before I start crying. You should remarry, Nate. At least then you won't worry about your son as much. There will be food in the fridge, and the apartment will be clean." The man was stunned. "Haley, what are you saying? I've just buried my wife. How can I bring another into my house? What will people think? How could I saddle my son with a stepmother? Besides, it would feel like betraying Doreen." Haley stood up, signalling that she wasn't going to argue, and headed for the door. "Think about it, Nate. It could solve many problems. As for what others might say, why should you care?" Nate didn't view himself as naive, and understood that Haley was subtly suggesting herself as a potential partner. However, he saw her as a sister figure, due to their years of neighbourliness and her friendship with his wife. She was familiar and comforting. Despite her beauty and good rapport with Tucker, Nate never saw her in a romantic light. He valued her reliability and wisdom, but he correctly interpreted her hint and didn't make any moves. Nevertheless, Nate saw potential in the idea of providing Tucker with a stepmother. He had considered hiring a nanny, but stories of negligent caregivers deterred him. And then he met Leslie, and she intuitively seemed the most suitable to him. He first noticed her while picking up a new desk for Tucker. She was working in the warehouse that day, and her attentive and helpful nature left a good impression on him. The young woman only surprised him because she resembled Doreen. It wasn't very obvious, but their types were similar. Doreen's facial features were clear and sharp, albeit slightly more rounded. Leslie, in contrast, had a girlish angularity, but her face was gentle and softened, as if painted with watercolours. Nate thought that if the stepmother reminded Tucker even a little of his mother, it might be easier for him to accept the stranger in their house. With no specific expectations, the man drove up to that very furniture store, and as if by order, she came out of it. As it turned out, Leslie remembered him, and when Nate asked if she would mind talking to him, she agreed. So, at the neighbour's suggestion, Nate began to build a new relationship with Leslie, even if it was not based on overwhelmingly romantic feelings. After they started dating, Tucker became prickly, like a hedgehog. A slight touch would make him curl up into a ball. Conversations with him became impossible. He would look askance and repeat his perspective, sometimes verbatim, sometimes with slight variations. Only 8 months had passed since Doreen's early death, yet Nate was already prepared for a new marriage. He recognised that his longing to remarry was not driven by emotion. Leslie was charming and gentle, and he liked her. However, he saw her less as a beloved wife and more as a responsible caretaker for Tucker and the household. This was admittedly selfish and not entirely fair to Leslie, but Nate tried to dismiss his guilt. After all, Leslie wasn't naive. She knew his situation and that he didn't love her as much as he had loved Doreen. The young woman turned out to be very pleasant in communication, a caring and attentive person. Despite Nate's pragmatic moves, she managed to alleviate the sharp pain he felt from losing his wife. Leslie attempted to bond with Tucker, but he neither dismissed her or responded rudely. He never called her by name, referring to her only as that woman or she. Tucker's contemptuous tone made it clear that he saw her as an enemy. However, the boy had never made such extreme statements until now. Nate suspected, even knew, that someone had influenced Tucker's perception of Leslie as a gold digger who, after marriage, would try to send him to an orphanage. He was certain that most likely Hayley was behind this. She frequently looked after Tucker when Nate was late from work. It seemed she wasn't just caring for Tucker, but also turning him against Leslie. Nate began to persuade his son. "Tucker, you must understand we have no other way out. Long-distance trips are now more profitable than driving around the city. I can't leave you alone. I'm afraid of losing you. It's important for me to have someone around who is always ready to help you. If you just spend more time with Leslie, you'll realise that she's a good person. Haven't you noticed that she looks like Mum in some ways?" The boy's anger bubbled over and he nearly shouted,
"I have noticed. That's why I despise her even more. Why is she alive when Mum isn't? I hate her."
Tucker sobbed so violently that he began to hiccup. Nate tried his best to soothe the upset child. He felt anger towards his neighbour himself and even fate, but he was determined not to abandon the idea of marrying Leslie. However, not only Tucker, but also Leslie's parents were opposed to this marriage. Understandably, they did not want their daughter to marry a widower raising a troubled child. "Why are you making things so hard for yourself?" the mother tried to appeal to her daughter's sense. "The child has problems and your Nate simply decided to shift them onto you. Mark my words, as soon as his son's health improves, you won't be needed. If you're lucky, it'll happen quickly and you'll still have time to build a life after the divorce. Why do you need a stranger's child? Even if you care for him, you'll still be an outsider,
drawing the father's attention and a wicked stepmother in his eyes. If you decide to have your own child, you'll be seen as a villain. Trust me, instances where children from a first marriage accept their step-parents are rare. And even then, most examples are from movies, where everything works out, but in real life it's usually different. Leslie's father was less articulate, but also objected to his daughter's marriage to Nate. Even your own child, your own flesh and blood, can surprise you unpleasantly. And with Nate's child, the genetics are unclear. Look around. Nate's not the only man in the world. There's a decent guy living next door. Why not give him a chance? But Leslie was determined. She was deeply in love with Nate, and due to her gentle nature, felt a strong sympathy for his son. She believed that over time, affection, support, and kindness could win the heart of her future stepson. Why didn't the parents of Nate's late wife take care of their grandson? Mrs. Gifford asked. That would have brought some comfort. Nate's wife was also an orphan. There's no one to provide care, Leslie replied to her mother. Mr. Gifford, Leslie's father, interjected. There's another problem. We don't know anything about this boy's heritage. I don't know how else to explain, but genes mean a lot. The boy might come from a troubled background. You'll raise him and he might end up drinking or worse. Why would you want that kind of life? Leslie felt unpleasant to hear this, and she asked her parents, Let's not judge the child before we get to know him. It's not his fault he hasn't got a mother. It's challenging for all of us to adjust to change, and it's even harder for him as a child. So please, when he comes to meet you, refrain from interrogating him. However, Leslie needlessly worried about her future stepson's meeting with her parents. Nate attended the meeting with his bride's parents without his son, who decided to stay home. Mr. and Mrs. Gifford didn't welcome Nate warmly, but Leslie continually reassured him with her affectionate gaze and subtle touches. Mrs. Gifford directly stated her opinion to Nate when he, following the rules of good manners, asked for her daughter's hand in marriage. Nate, she said, I have nothing against you personally. You're a good-looking man. However, I worry that you're rushing into marriage. Your son seems to hold a negative view of Leslie, despite her being a lovely and kind person. I fear Tucker may never accept her, let alone love her. He could, out of his own sadness, turn her life into an endless nightmare. Does my daughter deserve that? And Leslie's father went even further and suggested that Nate should give up the idea of marrying his daughter. One of you two should be smarter. Leslie is naive and acts from the heart without considering the consequences. You're the man, and older too, so you should be wiser. Nate, don't ruin my daughter's life. My experience tells me that this union won't last long. Tucker will cause problems, you'll be away, and Leslie will have to manage everything. If you had a daughter, would you want her to marry a single father? Nate remained silent. To him, it seemed miraculous that Leslie had accepted his proposal, despite the inevitable problems. He acknowledged that Mr. Gifford had a point, but he wasn't willing to let go of the opportunity that had come his way. Despite the warnings and grim predictions from their family, the happy couple decided to proceed with their plans. Leslie and Nate got married, registering their union in a simple manner. They signed their names in the marriage registration book without any extravagant celebrations, outfits, or guests. Nate gently tried to convince his son. Tucker, you understand. We have no other choice. Long-distance flights are our only option. In August, Leslie, a young wife, moved in with her husband and his son. However, Harmony did not hurry to come to the new family. Tucker tested his stepmother's patience, hoping to triumph, but Leslie remained unyielding. Tucker's early September birthday was dismal. He didn't attend school that day due to a medical examination at the hospital. What annoyed Tucker most was not the medical visit, but that Leslie, not his father, accompanied him. The boy's mood was sour,
far from celebratory, especially as he had decided not to invite his classmates. Nonetheless, Leslie suggested, "Tucker, why don't I ask your class teacher to invite your friends over? We'll inform their parents, of course. It'll be fun, don't you think? I'll order your favourite pizza, fried chicken wings and make fries. Is that okay?" Tucker instantly snapped at his stepmother. "Are you deaf or dumb? Or both? I clearly said that I don't want to invite anyone. Stay out of my way." After an emotional outburst, the boy felt exhausted. He shuffled along the wall, barely making it to his chair, and shouted angrily, "Close the door from outside and don't come in to see me." In the evening, Nate entered the boy's room, wished him a happy birthday and told, "Your present is waiting for you in the kitchen, but first, wash your hands." The birthday boy's mood improved slightly. However, upon seeing that Leslie was preparing food in the kitchen, he flatly refused to sit at the table, exclaiming, "I won't even try what you've cooked with your raking hands." Sighing, Leslie started packing away the food into the refrigerator, and Nate had to order takeaway. The boy begrudgingly accepted the combined gift from his father and stepmother. He left it on the table without even checking its contents. However, when Haley dropped by to wish him a happy birthday, Tucker immediately unwrapped her gift and even put on the t-shirt she had given him. Leslie decided not to upset her stepson further, and as if suddenly remembering that she had promised something to her parents, she left the apartment. There was a sense of surrender in her departure, but she chose not to dwell on it. She felt hurt that her attempts to connect with the boy were unsuccessful, but she felt powerless to change it. Later, when Tucker was asleep and Leslie returned to the apartment, her husband chided her. "Perhaps you shouldn't leave as soon as Tucker shows his displeasure. He'll adjust eventually." However, Leslie saw it differently. "No, Nate, I believe that pushing won't solve anything, especially today on his birthday. It should be as Tucker wishes. But what can I do if he refuses to accept that life, as harsh as it may be, continues? The doctor at the clinic said that Tucker's recovery mostly depends on him. His condition is not critical, but he requires consistent therapy and professional rehabilitation. I've noted everything the doctor said. I'll give it to you to read." The couple spent half a night trying to figure out how to help the child, studying all the information available on the internet, estimating what kind of rehabilitation they could financially afford, and reading reviews. Many methods were rejected because of the high cost. Nate commented, "Yes, it seems we can't avoid my long-haul trips. But there's no other way to make that much money. Now I'm unsure how Tucker will react." Since the tragedy, Nate had not been away for extended periods, especially with the current state of his relationship with his son and stepmother. So far, he had avoided long-distance trips, sacrificing earnings to remain nearby. He rented a van from a friend and provided various small services around the city and nearby areas. A few weeks later, Nate had a job that involved transporting items. It was November, a cold day, and the poor weather conditions were challenging. The day's drizzling rain, mixed with a dropping temperature, turned the streets into a slippery skating ring. The weather forecast predicted worsening conditions. The movers hired by the client were strangers to Nate. His usual crew could not assist him that day for various reasons. After unloading the last batch of items, the movers received their payment and quickly left. "Can you dispose of a few more bags of garbage along the way?" the customer asked casually. "I'll pay you extra, of course." Nate didn't decline. Extra money was always useful, especially since he wanted to spoil his son and young wife. Leslie, however, always seemed embarrassed and even shy when he spent money on her. The thought of his wife and son made Nate feel gloomy, even though it had been several months since their wedding. Tucker still harboured a dislike for his stepmother, which he made no effort to conceal. Leslie never complained, but Nate could see it for himself. Tucker still refused to eat the food Leslie prepared. The school meal wasn't particularly fulfilling, and despite Nate giving him money for the school buffet, Tucker's refusal to eat had led to weight loss. The boy's strength was slowly dwindling, his mobility worsening, and the question of homeschooling was being raised. A couple of his classmates supported Tucker, helping him walk to and from school, but due to the icy conditions, each journey was perilous. Nate couldn't bear the thought of his son getting injured. For now, the teacher was understanding and allowed Tucker to stay home during particularly harsh conditions, provided he studied independently and completed all his class and homework assignments. Lost in gloomy thoughts, Nate nearly forgot about the trash bags, but pulled up at the last second. He parked near a large garbage can and threw bags inside. As he moved away from the container, he noticed a slight movement from the corner of his eye. His first thought was that he had disturbed some cats. Chastising himself for his curiosity, Nate shone his phone's flashlight towards the movement. There, on some pizza boxes, fallen from the trash, was a small dog with a wagging tail. Nate said softly, "Hello, little one. Don't be scared, I won't hurt you. Why are you hiding here? Were you thrown out of your home? Or have you never had a home?" In the dim light, Nate saw the sad story of a small, vagrant dog, likely a puppy. Its fur was stained and its eyes were filled with a mix of desperate hope and fear. Seeing the creature stirred feelings of pity. "What shall I do with you now?" Nate asked himself. "You could die here for no reason at all. Do you want to come with me? Tucker could use some joy. You can spend the night in warmth and we'll see what happens next." The dog looked at Nate with disbelief, but when Nate squatted, the dog got up from its cardboard bed and timidly approached, tail wagging. Nate, who had only stepped out of his car for a moment, was already feeling the harsh chill of late fall, so he quickly picked up the small creature and carried it to the car. He didn't place the dog on the seat, unsure if it had fleas, but laid down a rag on the floor and placed the trembling creature there. "Hang in there, buddy," said Nate, who was generally not a sentimental man. "I'll turn on the heater and keep you warm." Minutes later, the car was filled with unpleasant odours. The man had to crack the window, and he started to worry about Leslie's reaction to the smelly dog. Moreover, he suspected his clothes had been soiled while carrying the dog to the car. The dog, now warm, behaved calmly and made no attempts to escape. Nate was surprised by how light the dog was, easily carrying it to the apartment. Leslie was shocked when she saw not only her husband in the hallway, but also a dirty dog with thin legs and a long snout. Her words were harsh, but her tone revealed her sympathy and willingness to help the animal. "Nate, where on earth did you find this poor thing? Ooh, it reeks. We need to give him a bath." "It's not he, it's she. I found her near the garbage cans and just had to bring her home." Leslie checked her watch and sighed. "Oh, we don't have any special dog shampoo and it's too late to go to the pet store, but I guess we can use regular shampoo to remove all the dirt." Hearing a noise in the hallway, Tucker emerged from his room. The little dog, amusingly wagging its tail, confidently approached him. The excitement made the child forget that he had decided not to speak with Leslie, and he suggested, "We should ask Miss Blount from the 6th floor. She has a dog. Maybe she can lend us some shampoo." Leslie, glad that this situation had broken the tension between her and her stepson a bit, quickly went to ask the neighbour. Meanwhile, Tucker found it difficult to crouch, but he was too engrossed with the puppy to care. He continued to pet it, ignoring the unpleasant smell and dirty fur. Nate's eyes watered when his son asked, "May we keep her? I'll take care of her and walk her myself. I'll train her so well that Chili will be the best dog." The man smiled. "Good for you. You've already thought of a name. But why Chili?" "Well, see how her fur is covered with some red sauce. Why not call her Chili? If she were a boy, we could call her Ketchup." Nate laughed and offered another funny idea. "You could also name her Pizza. She was trying to keep warm on a pizza box." While father and son deliberated on the pet's name, Leslie returned from the neighbour on the 6th floor. In her hands was not just special shampoo, but also a few cans of wet dog food and a phone number for a veterinary clinic written on a piece of paper. Bathing the animal was easier with 2 people, so Nate helped his son. Having remembered Tucker's past disagreements with his stepmother, the man didn't entrust her with this task. Chili patiently endured being bathed and blow-dried. She behaved humbly, showing that she would do anything to avoid being back on the streets. Once clean, the dog was revealed to be a cute mongrel, still in her teenage years and rather funny-looking. Her lineage probably included collies. The lively dog happily ate the food provided and then curled up to sleep on an old jacket of Tucker's that had been placed in the corner of his room as a temporary bed. On his first day in the new house. On her first day in the new house, Chili, left alone, caused quite a mess before Tucker returned from school. Likely driven by hunger, the dog scavenged for food, consuming all the bread on the table and the apples, leaving crumbs scattered across the floor. Once she was full, Chili found amusement in ruining Leslie's boots and Tucker's sneakers. Tucker arrived home to a scene of chaos, including puddles and piles scattered around the apartment. Unfazed by her actions, Chili greeted Tucker with a wagging tail. However annoyed, Tucker couldn't stay mad at the adorable dog for long. He lightly scolded her, saying, "Why did you have to ruin my sneakers? Leslie's shoes would have been enough. You really thought this through, didn't you, Chili? I bet you wanted to drive that nasty intruder away." Tucker didn't clean up meticulously, leaving the damaged shoes for his new friend. However, his mood soured a bit in the kitchen. With no bread left and a freezing rain falling outside, he didn't want to brave the elements for a trip to the store. Thankfully, he found some biscuits in a cupboard, which he used to make sandwiches for himself and Chili. The grateful dog never left Tucker's side. When Tucker sat down to do his homework, the dog settled next to him, happily chewing on Leslie's boot that the boy had given to her. When Leslie returned home from work to take Chili to the vet, she tripped over her chewed-up boots. Although she was disappointed because they were brand new, she knew she could have kept them in a closed locker. The mess in the kitchen stunned Leslie. As she had to rush Chili to the vet, she quickly tidied it up as best she could, instead of having her snack. She knocked and peeked into Tucker's room, deciding not to scold the dog for ruining her boots. With a deep sigh, she counted to 5, aware of the time crunch, and asked her stepson, "Can you help me put Chili's collar and leash on?" "No way! I won't give up my dog," Tucker retorted indignantly. "I won't let you take her to the shelter." Leslie sat on the floor, put the leash on the dog and began to explain. "Tucker, what shelter are you talking about? Yesterday Mrs. Blount gave me a clinic's contact to schedule a health check for Chili. I've already made the arrangements, and we have to be there in actually 18 minutes. You're welcome to join us. I'll call a cab." Tucker wanted to accompany Chili to the vet to hear advice on care and everything else, but he'd rather do it with his father, not his stepmother. However, his father had informed him that morning that he would be home late. "No, I'm not going," responded Tucker. "I can barely stand living in the same apartment with you, let alone sharing a cab. Just be warned, if you take Chili somewhere and leave her there, then claim she ran away, I'll find out." Leslie simply shook her head. She was aware of Tucker's contempt for her, but to suspect her of such malice. His hatred must run deep if he could imagine such a possibility. Did he think she would take revenge on a pet over ruined shoes? Choosing not to defend herself to avoid seeming pitiful, Leslie responded in as neutral a tone as she could manage. "All right, Tucker, we're leaving. If it's not too much trouble, could you call your dad and ask him to buy bread? Thank you." The boy remained silent, observing his stepmother's struggle. Chili was not fond of the leash and tried to escape its grip. It took Leslie significant effort to drag Chili into the cab. The driver, an animal lover who was content with the pet fare, praised the dog. "Wow, she's feisty, but small.
but her strong character is evident," he remarked. Leslie responded with a sigh. "Indeed, she's been with us for less than 24 hours and shows no signs of shyness. Instead, she's already caused a ruckus. I'm worried about what she might do next. She's chewed up shoes today. Will she start on the furniture tomorrow?" The driver reassured her. "Don't worry, she's likely teething and will chew on anything not well hidden. I've experienced this before with our Rottweiler. He taught us to keep things tidy." The man happily shared stories about his beloved pet throughout the trip, concluding as they neared the veterinary clinic, "Having a dog is hard, especially at first, but you won't find a better friend. It's when the pet leaves forever that you realise how hard it really is." He sincerely wished the passenger luck and patience with her dog. After thanking him, Leslie paid and led her stubborn pet to the vet clinic. The vet found Chili to be quite healthy, but prescribed a course for parasite removal, followed by vaccinations. Leslie purchased everything she needed at the clinic's pharmacy, including food and dried treats for Chili to chew on instead of shoes or possessions. She also received advice on leash training from a talkative salesperson. On the way home, she tempted Chili with a treat, resulting in a pleasant walk. Unsurprisingly, the majority of Chili's care fell upon Leslie. She cleaned up after the dog and ensured it didn't chew on inappropriate items. Tucker felt a twinge of jealousy, as the dog he considered his showed affection towards his stepmother. That's why he conveyed via his father that only he was allowed to feed and water the dog. Leslie was willing to accept this, as the pet had brought a more relaxed atmosphere to the apartment. The dog's antics often had Tucker laughing, and he even started eating more. Although his diet mainly consisted of sandwiches and cutlets, both favourites of the dog, his appetite improved, especially since Nate had a firm rule for his son. "You can only share food with Chili after you've eaten half of it yourself." In December, Nate received an enticing job offer from an old acquaintance. It was a long-distance trip with good pay and pre-arranged return cargo. However, he was concerned about leaving his son Tucker for an extended period for the first time since a recent tragedy. He cautiously approached his wife, saying, "Leslie, I've been offered a job with good conditions. It can earn us good money before Christmas. But I'll have to be away for a while, about 2 weeks." Leslie encouraged him. "Go, and don't worry, we'll manage." As for Tucker, he looked at his father sadly and then asked, "Daddy, can I stay with Haley while you're away? I'll make a deal with her myself if you're too busy." Nate squinted at him and replied, "Tucker, I'm tired of burdening Haley with our problems. She's busy enough without our requests. Although she's always ready to help, it's not fair to ask her to handle everything." Despite Tucker's attempts to dissuade him, Nate was adamant. "Tucker, you'll want to take Chili with you, won't you?" The boy nodded in response to the man's stern voice. "All the more. It's not nice to dump the care of your dog on Haley. So, you're staying here in our apartment under Leslie's supervision. I expect you not to make things difficult for her. Behave like a reasonable adult. This discussion is over. I'm relying on you, son." Leslie bid her husband farewell, although her nerves were tingling with anxiety. She would be left alone with a child who resented her, and for a significant period of time. As she prepared things for Nate, Leslie pleaded, "Please call your son whenever you can, okay? Tucker needs your support now. And don't forget about me. At least send me something once a day. It would mean a lot." The trip was scheduled to last for 14 days, but to Nate's relief, he managed to wrap up his work 4 days earlier. Tired but satisfied, he opened the door of his apartment, choosing to surprise his son and wife with his early return. He hoped the surprise would bring them joy. Merry laughter emanated from Tucker's room, leading the man to believe that the child invited his friends. However, no stranger's clothes or shoes were in the hallway. Nate removed his shoes and jacket, then quietly approached the door, careful not to startle anyone. He saw his son and Leslie dressing up Chili in a snow maiden costume. The two were so engrossed in their activity that they didn't immediately notice they were being watched. But the dog, sensing his master's familiar scent and hearing his footsteps, quickly gave Nate away. "Hooray! Daddy's here!" Tucker shouted. With Leslie's help, he got up from the floor to hug his father. Nate hugged his son, noting with joy the positive changes in the boy's relationship with his stepmother. Tucker was no longer avoiding her, but was laughing beside her. Leslie's happy face also indicated that all was well in the house. "Why didn't you warn me that you were coming early?" Leslie asked playfully. "We only have a squid salad and some sautéed mushrooms left. I'll go to the kitchen and whip up something quick. Tucker, do you have any suggestions?" "Of course. I always have ideas. How about some pasta? Chili loves it." Nate watched, bewildered, as his wife and son burst into laughter. During his absence, they seemed to have developed shared memories that he was yet to discover. When the laughter subsided, Nate asked, "Pasta sounds good, but why are you laughing?" Smiling, Leslie winked at her husband, patted her stepson's head and replied, "Tucker will explain everything. I'll go start cooking." She tiptoed to peck her husband's beard-covered cheek. The previous days had been tough, and she was overjoyed to have her family together again. Barely had she started boiling water for the pasta when Nate, Tucker, and their dog Chili walked into the kitchen. "We thought we'd keep you company," Nate explained, "and we can even help if needed." Leslie lovingly looked at her husband and said, "You've just come from a journey. Go shower, wash away your fatigue and change your clothes. Tucker and I will manage." "Sure," Tucker agreed. "I can even chop an onion now without crying. Leslie got me a useful tool, so I'm practicing and getting things done." By the time Nate returned to the kitchen, freshened up and slightly relaxed, the air was already filled with delightful aromas, and Chili was crunching something in her bowl. During dinner, Nate looked at his son sitting across from him. He happily noted the positive changes in the boy's health and appearance since Chili joined their house. It seemed like only a week had passed, yet the child's cheeks were rosier and his eyes sparkled as they used to. Trying to push away melancholic memories, Nate asked, "So, can anybody finally explain to me the story with Chili and pasta?" Tucker began to recount with occasional laughter. "Leslie left some minced meat to defrost on the table, intending to use it for cutlets and pasta. We put a lid on the plate and went to physical therapy. Upon returning, we found out that Chili had eaten a whole kilogram of the minced meat." The woman explained, "I wasn't upset about the wasted meat or the disrupted plans. I was worried that Chili, having eaten so much cold, greasy raw meat, would fall ill. Thankfully, I hadn't added any onions or spices to it before freezing." The dog looked at us with such innocent eyes and grunted quietly. Realizing that neither Tucker nor I were going to scold her, she immediately became her usual affectionate self, wagging her tail so hard that I was afraid it would detach. Leslie laughed as Tucker continued to share the week's events during their father's absence. "Daddy, do you know how brave and smart Leslie is? She's downright cool. After Chili's vaccination, we could take her out for walks. We went out for a short time so we could get some fresh air and she could learn where to do her business. We were at the corner when a large dog came running at us out of nowhere. Leslie told this scary dog to sit. It didn't follow the command, but at least it slowed down. However, I almost panicked. I wanted to pick up Chili, but Leslie told me to stay still. She shielded me with Chili and continued to give the dog commands to sit, lie down, and stand. Luckily at this time, the dog listened. Then the dog's owner came running. He was terrified and afraid that something terrible might happen. He explained that he was walking the dog for his sick brother. The leash's cabin air broke, and he even showed it to me. He admitted he was confused and didn't know what to shout except stop. He apologized for the incident. Leslie didn't make a scene, and she even praised him because the dog responded to her commands. But Haley, who overheard our conversation, scolded the man. She said she was scared when she saw the large dog running towards us from a distance. She even claimed she needed hair dye to cover her grey hair from the fright. The man was ashamed even more. He then tied the leash to the dog's collar and led it away from us. Can you believe it? Leslie, good for you. How did you know the dog would obey? The woman shrugged. Well, the weight categories of me and this dog were clearly unequal. I could only hope for the element of surprise. Nate looked at his son and saw that his moments of joy were quickly replaced by sadness. The complete healing of Tucker's soul was clearly still a long way off. It was as if he hadn't yet allowed himself to experience complete happiness, but he was noticeably improving. There wasn't much time left to prepare for Christmas Eve. Nate promised to refrain from long-distance trips for a while to share in the responsibility with his son and wife. The festive mood was somewhat dampened by the memory that just a year ago Doreen was with them. But Nate tried to shake off the melancholy. They didn't go all out with their apartment decorations. Tucker asked his father to forego a Christmas tree this year, and Nate understood that the reason wasn't just about their mischievous dog. Buying the Christmas tree had been made into a real tradition by Doreen. They used to leisurely stroll around the nearby Christmas tree bazaars, selecting the most beautiful trees. Then they usually went to a cafe or pizzeria, eat, laugh, discuss their favourite trees, and only then would they go to pick up their chosen tree. Without Doreen, this process just wouldn't be the same. Tucker, upon seeing all the trees for sale, was nearly moved to tears, reminded of his mother. Nate and Leslie did their best to comfort him. A cheerful dog played a significant role in this challenging task. Without any words, the dog empathized with and encouraged the boy. It became a cherished evening tradition for Nate, Tucker and Leslie to take joint walks with Chili. One day, a man with the large dog on a leash approached them and Tucker exclaimed, "Oh, Daddy, look! It's the same dog that Leslie had stopped. It doesn't seem scary at all now. He's quite cute, like a bear cub, and I even want to pet him." Nate cautioned his son, "Tucker, I hope you remember that you should not touch unfamiliar dogs without asking permission from their owners." The boy nodded and a stranger came forward saying, "Excuse me, my brother told me about an incident involving my dog, Tyler. Apparently he knocked over a woman. We're here to apologize." Tyler must have been confused. His best friend in our old town was a dog that looked exactly like yours, so he got excited. "I'm sorry it was inconsiderate. Tyler is usually well behaved, but he must have been so bored he ran away." Tucker proposed to the man, "Maybe he could be friends with our dog Chili. She's a good, cheerful girl, but with no playmates. We also have a Bologna living on the 6th floor, but she has a difficult character. She likes to walk alone." The man responded warmly, "We can try it if your parents agree." Nate held his breath, expecting his son to clarify with indignation that Leslie wasn't his parent. However, the boy was busy watching the large dog interact with his little Chili. The dogs cautiously sniffed each other, then started playing in the fresh snow. Meanwhile, Haley was making her way home from the bus stop. As she neared her neighbours and the stranger, she cheerfully greeted them. "Good evening, everyone. What a lovely dog you have. It doesn't bother our Chili. I was terrified last time." The man apologised again, which Haley dismissed with a wave. "No worries. All's well that ends well. I must leave now. I need to pick up a dress for a client and rush to her for a fitting. Luckily, she doesn't live far and I can walk there." The dog's owner offered, "We can accompany you if you like. Tyler needs a good walk, and his new friend seems a bit chilly." Haley shrugged. "I can manage on my own. It's not really appropriate to walk with strangers in the evening." The man introduced himself. "Paul Garcia, at your service." After introductions and an exchange of phone numbers between Nate and Paul for future dog walks, everyone went their separate ways. Leslie was observing all of them from her window. As an empathetic woman, she understood that Hayley had developed strong feelings for Nate. His marriage to another woman must have been a blow to Hayley's ego. Despite this, Hayley had the strength not to seek revenge for her unrequited affection. She treated both Nate and his new wife civilly, avoiding causing any trouble or scandals. Of course, Leslie knew that the neighbour was a friend of Nate's first wife and did not want to become friends with her. There was no hostility between them. However, their forced interaction had even sparked a degree of mutual respect. Leslie would have been genuinely happy for her neighbour if Hayley found her own happiness, whether with Tyler's owner or someone else. Soon, Paul started to make regular appearances in their yard. Leslie suspected that he was visiting for more than just chili. He often joined Hayley on their walks and would accompany her when she had to go somewhere urgently. One day, when Leslie was home alone, there was a knock at the door. An excited Hayley stood at the doorstep. "Just imagine. Paul asked me in detail about Tucker a week ago. I told him everything I could. It's silly to keep a boy's tragedy secret, isn't it? I thought Paul was merely curious, but today he called me. He asked about Tucker's treatment. Paul has a professor who's willing to look at Tucker's medical records. Ideally, they could be scanned and emailed, but it would be better to see Tucker in person. This can only happen after the holidays when the doctor returns from a business trip abroad. If there's a chance, we should take it, right?" Leslie seemed a bit surprised and replied, "Sorry, Hayley, I'm confused about something. Paul has Nate's phone number. They call each other about walks. Why doesn't Paul directly ask my husband?" Hayley effortlessly answered the question. Paul was afraid of causing Nate any negative emotions. He didn't want to give false reassurances in case his friend refused to see Tucker. He worried about how he would appear then, like a typical braggart. "Well, I need to get to work. Paul left this email address on a piece of paper. He suggested sending the documents and description of Tucker's treatment as soon as possible. The professor might be able to provide some preliminary recommendations." "Thank you, Hayley. Please thank Paul for me. I'll call Nate immediately and ask for his permission. If he agrees, I'll send all the necessary scans right away." Nate, desperate for any glimmer of hope, readily agreed to a remote consultation with the professor for the time being. Meanwhile, a week before the holiday, Nate had a serious conversation with his son. "Tucker, I want to discuss something with you. I thought about inviting Leslie's parents to the feast. It seems only right, since they are her family. We should establish some communication with them. Would you be okay with that?" The boy pondered briefly and then replied, "Yes, we should invite them. I would be glad, as some of my classmates have 3 grandparents, and I don't seem to have any." Nate was pleased his son agreed. To not upset the boy's serene mood, he subtly changed the subject, asking, "What do you mean by 3 grandparents?" "Well, Megan Hopkins has a mum, a dad, and a stepdad. That's how she has so many grandparents," the boy explained. When Nate told Leslie about inviting her parents, she seemed slightly taken aback. She asked, "Is Tucker sure about this? I wouldn't want to upset him. After all, this will be his first Christmas without his mother." Nate reassured her. "Don't worry, he suggested it himself, saying he wanted more relatives. I didn't realize how much he missed his grandparents." "Then great, I'll call and invite them right away," Leslie responded immediately. Nate hesitated, suggesting, "Perhaps it would be better if I called. I need to establish relationships with them as well." Leslie agreed, considering that Nate was the head of their family and the owner of the apartment where the celebration would be held. It made sense that he should extend the invitation. The call from their son-in-law stirred mixed feelings in Leslie's parents. On one hand, they were not entirely pleased with their daughter's marriage. It wasn't the kind of happiness they envisioned for Leslie. On the other hand, whenever she called, her voice was cheerful, and she seemed quite happy. Perhaps they had misjudged Nate and his son. If Nate was making an effort to bridge the gap between them,
Mr. and Mrs. Gifford were willing to forego a quiet evening at home for a celebration at their daughter's new home for the sake of her happiness. By noon of the Christmas day, their anticipation had peaked, and even though they were invited for 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they decided it wouldn't be inappropriate to arrive early and help set the table. After ensuring that all the presents were packed in their bags and the baked turkey was wrapped safely, Mr. Gifford and Mrs. Gifford set off to visit their daughter and her family. The initial awkwardness of their early arrival was dispelled by Chili, a dog recently trained to fetch slippers. Delighted to show off her new skill, Chili entertained the guests and broke the ice between people. Leslie's parents were the first to give Tucker his gift, a large construction set and a traditional bag of sweets. He thanked them politely. Next, Leslie and Nate received a shared present. When Mr. Gifford noticed Chili without a gift, he guiltily gestured and said to his wife, "We forgot about the dog. Should we give her a larger piece of the turkey?" Mrs. Gifford offered to assist her daughter in the kitchen, but Leslie declined. "Mum, everything is nearly ready. Just a few final touches and setting the treats and drinks on the table. Rest and relax. Don't worry. I'll manage." Tucker proposed to the guests. "Would you like me to show you my badge collection?" Mrs. Gifford was thrilled. "Thank you. I'd love to see it. I also collected badges when I was young." Mr. Gifford also decided to join his wife and his stepson. Leaning on his trusty cane, the boy, accompanied by Chili, led the guests to his room. However, upon reaching the boy's bedside table, Mrs. Gifford stared in surprise at the picture in a frame placed there. She remained immobile, even when Mr. Gifford called her. "What's wrong, darling?" he asked worriedly. "Look for yourself. Maybe I'm imagining things," the woman replied in a subdued voice, pointing to the nightstand. The man approached, unable to suppress a surprised exclamation. "No way!" Tucker was utterly perplexed. He couldn't fathom why his mother's portrait had such a profound impact on the guests. What about this picture was so surprising? Sure, his mum was beautiful and very young there, but why did Mr. Gifford utter, "No way"? The subsequent comments from the guests only deepened the boy's confusion. Mrs. Gifford mused aloud. "Leslie here is about 15 years old, but I don't remember such a picture, such clothes, or even such an environment. I don't understand anything." Mr. Gifford cautiously asked Tucker, "Has Leslie told you where this picture was taken? We had never seen this photo of our daughter before." Surprised, Tucker looked at the man and, trying to hold back tears, said, "But that's not Leslie, that's my mother, Doreen, in the picture. It was taken in the orphanage." Mr. Gifford squeezed his wife's hand as she was about to say something, interrupting her. "Excuse us, we got sidetracked. Shall we continue examining your badge collection? It's fascinating." The couple observed the badges, listening to the boy speak enthusiastically about his hobby. They admired the most vibrant and rare badges, and even asked questions, but their heavy eyes kept meeting each other's. Nate, peering into his son's room, invited everyone to eat. "Let's have lunch, and then you can return to examining Tucker's collection. Are you okay with that, son?" As Mrs. and Mr. Gifford moved towards the door, they paused by Doreen's picture again. Nate noticed this odd behaviour, but couldn't understand their reaction to his first wife's pictures. Before he could ponder further, Leslie had already gathered everyone in the living room for lunch. She quickly noticed her parents' unusual embarrassment and excitement. The more she watched them, the more she became convinced that her parents seemed to know something and did not know whether to tell it to others or not. After everyone had finished their dinner and Tucker left to collect the gifted constructor, Leslie asked her parents, "Mum, Dad, what's wrong? What impressed you so much about Tucker's room?" "It's all so strange," Mrs. Gifford said after a slight hesitation. "I'll start with the beginning. Rick and I got married when we were students, and
we had a daughter, Molly. I'll blame myself forever for being a bad mother. I don't have any excuses for myself. I'll just tell it as it was. Molly cried all night because her teeth were coming in. Rick was busy with his classes, while I went to the store in a half-asleep state. Molly was sleeping so sweetly that I didn't want to take her out of the stroller. Times were simpler then, or perhaps we were not so cautious as now. Regardless, the main reason I left the stroller with Molly at the store was due to my carelessness. Back then, almost all mums did the same. When I returned 5 minutes later with milk and a loaf of bread, Molly was no longer in the stroller. I was filled with terror. She couldn't have just left on her own. Searching the stroller meticulously, I hoped to find a clue that would answer the most horrifying question of my life. I was hoping to find something that would lead me back to my daughter. But there was nothing. No note, no sign. In those days, we didn't have the convenience of cell phones. I couldn't even call Rick to ask if he had taken the child without my knowledge. We involved law enforcement and volunteers, but all our efforts were fruitless. For many long years, we searched for our missing daughter, refusing to leave our temporary housing, hoping that Molly's kidnapper would eventually reveal themselves. Then you, Leslie, were born, and we continued searching for our missing daughter, but unsuccessfully. We knew the rumours about the lost elder sister would impact you as you grew up. That was the sole reason we relocated. I had almost resigned myself to never knowing what happened to our little girl. But the picture on the nightstand in Tucker's room has left me almost certain that our lost Molly is Doreen. It seems she lived right near us, and we may have even crossed paths unknowingly. It's heartbreaking that due to someone's cruel intent, Molly ended up in an orphanage. As Nate and Leslie attentively listened, they found it difficult to believe the startling news that the evening had brought them. It was indeed challenging to process such information. Leslie was the first to regain her composure. I can't believe that Tucker's mother is my sister. What a peculiar twist of fate. I am Tucker's maternal aunt. Wow! Nate now understood why he had noticed a resemblance between Leslie and Doreen. After all, they most likely were relatives. Although Leslie was much younger, certain shared features had hinted at their family connection. Tucker, seeking his father's help with a construction set, unintentionally heard about his relationship with Leslie. Surprised, he asked, "So, Mr. and Mrs. Gifford are my real grandparents?" Mrs. Gifford, tearful, rushed to embrace her only grandson. Moments later, Mr. Gifford joined them. The scene was incredibly touching, and Leslie began to wipe away her own tears. She had feared that she would always be a stranger to her stepson, and now, it turns out, he was very likely her nephew. All evening, Nate and Tucker were fondly remembering what a wonderful wife and mother Doreen had been. When, the next day, Haley arrived to wish them all Merry Christmas, she seemed to be shocked upon hearing the full story from Leslie. "Initially, I thought you were a swindler," she said. "I even warned Nate and Tucker to be wary of you. But over time, my opinion of you significantly improved. I sometimes felt guilty for betraying Doreen's memory in this way, but I couldn't help it." Leslie embraced Haley and said, "Thank you for everything you did, for my sister and her son." From that day, Leslie's parents began visiting her family more frequently. Nate, initially wary of them, became more comfortable. He went to work with peace of mind, knowing everything would be okay at home. The professor, where Leslie took Tucker for a checkup, examined the boy and scheduled additional tests. He reassured Leslie, saying, "I can't make any guarantees, but the human capacity for recovery can be astounding. Let's hope the treatment helps." Both Mr. and Mrs. Gifford treated Tucker with great care. Unnoticed by others, Tucker began to call them grandfather and grandmother. They took turns with Leslie in taking the child to medical centres, cultural sites and amusement parks. Tucker was overjoyed to have such wonderful grandparents, and proudly introduced them to his friends. On the anniversary of Tucker's mother's death, they all visited the cemetery together. Leslie, spending some time at the grave, expressed her gratitude and sought forgiveness. "Thank you, sister. Tucker is a wonderful child whom I love dearly. I love Nate too. I feel ashamed to be so happy. I regret not knowing you sooner, but I promise I'll do everything possible to make your men happy." Family get-togethers became a mandatory tradition that alternated weekends at Leslie's parents' house or Nate's apartment. During a summer family picnic organised by Nate, Tucker unveiled the results of his treatment. He carefully leaned his cane onto the table and took a few tentative steps, followed by more. The adults rushed to embrace him, showering him with words and kisses. Chili watched the joyful scene, realising that something wonderful was happening, perhaps even better than a bowl of special canned dog food. The man who saved her from certain death, the kind woman who often took her for walks, and her best friend, the wonderful boy who could now walk without a stick, all deserved her joy. Then Tucker and Chili ran across the field, as if playing catch-up, and the adults watched them, marvelling at the incredible intertwining of their fates. When Haley and Paul, with formidable-looking but good-natured Tyler, joined the happy family, they invited everyone to their wedding. And then Haley gave Chili a toy, saying, "If it wasn't for you, I probably never would have found my happiness."
Seth strolled down the city's central street. Recently his company, where he'd been an engineer for nearly 15 years, relocated to a new building. The commute was more challenging due to the increased distance and traffic, but the bright, beautiful building and pleasing cityscape made up for it. The city centre was filled with parks, squares, and intellectual inhabitants. Rather than rushing to his car after work, Seth had begun to unwind by walking the streets. The lively atmosphere with children holding balloons, ice cream in hand, and lovely elderly couples made every day feel like a celebration. By the time he reached his car, the evening traffic had usually subsided. Home had become a more inviting place since Janet moved in. The apartment now smelled of fresh baked goods, homemade meals, and feminine fragrances. Janet was warm, kind, and comforting. Seth found his heart softening in her presence, despite the hardships he'd experienced. Not everyone could endure what had happened to Seth's family. The man once believed he was no longer capable of strong feelings, yet Janet proved him wrong. She brought quiet, calm joy to his life. Together they enjoyed watching TV series, going on picnics with friends, and travelling to the sea during the velvet season. Still, Seth was not entirely free from heavy thoughts. And how could it be otherwise, when it wasn't known to the end what happened to Susie? Young parents with small children, especially girls of 4 to 5 years old, still attracted Seth's attention, and now he observed one family in particular, a young mother and a father in a bright printed t-shirt and jean shorts. They had 2 children, a listless, bored-looking 8-year-old boy and a curious 4-year-old girl. Seth noticed the parents appeared slightly weary of their young daughter's incessant questions. The mother responded with one-word answers, while the father at times irritably asked the child to be quiet. Seth thought to himself how these young parents didn't realize the joy of holding their little daughter's hand and engaging in conversation with her. Seth would now happily answer a million questions from a 4-year-old girl. As the saying goes, we often fail to appreciate what we have. Years ago, Seth thoroughly enjoyed fatherhood. His daughter Susie never irritated him as a young father. Perhaps it was because he and his wife Janet had longed for a child. Seth and Janet met at the college, studying related engineering specialities. They attended many of the same lectures. Seth quickly noticed Janet, a beautiful, quiet student with large blue eyes. Being one of the few women in their faculty, Janet stood out with her light, wavy hair, wide-open eyes, and refined features. However, Seth was drawn to her not only because of her beauty, but also her sincerity. Unlike other girls, Janet didn't flirt or deceive. She was genuinely passionate about her studies, much like Seth. Any attempts at romance from other students were firmly rejected. When Seth was paired with Janet for a project, their successful teamwork led to friendship, which eventually blossomed into romance. Janet and Seth had much in common. They grew up in similar families, shared interests, and their life plans largely aligned. Both wanted to build a career, achieve something, find their place, and then start a family. After getting married and renting an apartment, Janet worked in a research laboratory, continuing her scientific work. Seth chose an internship at the engineering department of a plant. Their initial salaries were modest, but as they climbed the career ladder, their incomes increased. Eventually, they were able to buy their own apartment and renovate it. The couple lived harmoniously. Seth found Janet's company easy and pleasant. They understood each other intuitively, resolving disagreements through discussion and negotiation rather than arguments. Seth's mother had once told him, with his pedantic and correct nature, no girl would tolerate him. She was proven wrong by Janet, who was as rational and conscientious as Seth. It seemed that they had found their perfect match. Seth was happy. His life was unfolding even better than he had dreamed. He had an interesting, high-paying job, a loving and understanding wife, and a beautiful home. 7 years into their marriage, Seth and Janet began discussing having children. They had prepared financially for their future heirs. All the grandparents eagerly awaited grandchildren and promised to help with childcare. This meant Janet wouldn't have to sacrifice her career at the research institute. The couple decided to approach parenthood consciously. They underwent a full medical examination to minimize the risk of health issues in their child. It was then discovered that Janet had serious fertility problems. "Pregnancy is practically impossible," declared the famous doctor, whom Janet had finally managed to see. "So there's no chance at all?" Seth asked for clarification. He had accompanied his wife to the clinic that day. "Well, you can try various treatment options," the doctor replied evasively, "but these methods are expensive and time-consuming with no guaranteed result. Congenital abnormalities occur, unfortunately." This news was a shock to the couple. Everything had been going to plan, and then suddenly this happened. After the doctor's disappointing verdict, both Seth and Janet realized how much they wanted to become parents. The treatment period began with visits to various doctors, numerous tests, and Janet's periodic hospital stays. This process was expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. The hope followed by repeated disappointment was difficult to hear. Janet, typically calm and rational, often cried when she thought her husband couldn't hear her. But he noticed everything: her red eyes, swollen eyelids, and most painfully her look of despair. Seth found it difficult to see his wife in this state. His primary desire was not for a child anymore, but for the happiness of the woman he loved. He didn't know how to help Janet. As best as he could, Seth supported his wife. He arranged consultations at the best reproductive centers in the country, accompanied her to painful procedures, and comforted her. "Why don't we give up on this?" sometimes he suggested. "The race for a child has already acquired some unhealthy character." Seth wanted to stop it. "Let's develop our careers. It's important too." Before, work and scientific activity had been the main things in Janet's life. The woman's eyes lit up when she was told about the next development or experimental project. Work inspired Janet, gave her strength and energy. And she was good at what she did, very good. She was respected, invited to consultations, and was the person people turned to with difficult questions. Now Janet had changed a lot. She no longer took on interesting projects, worked strictly from 9 to 5 and was eager to head home. Once an outstanding scientist, now preferred simple routine work and completely abandoned her research. This really frightened Seth. Janet's changes made her tense. She became tearful, irritable, and somewhat capricious. Most distressing was her fixation on inaccessible motherhood, making it her sole focus. Nothing else interested or pleased her, and she stopped communicating with her friends and colleagues. Janet spent her spare time studying information about her diagnosis. Years passed this way. Occasionally Janet would calm down, return to work, but her dream of motherhood always resurfaced, leading to more doctor visits, tests and research. Medicine is always advancing. New reproductive technologies appear. Old ones improve. We have to try, she used to explain to her husband. Seth missed the old Janet, intelligent, driven, understanding. Sometimes she came back for a while, and those moments were blissful. They could discuss various topics, watch movies together and plan trips. We could adopt a child from the orphanage. Seth had suggested this to his wife multiple times. He believed that a child, even if not their own, would bring Janet joy and help her experience motherhood. However, Janet wanted only her own child and remained focused on this goal, oblivious to everything else. 15 years into their marriage, the much-anticipated pregnancy finally happened, thanks to another experimental treatment. Both Seth and Janet were almost 40. Seth hadn't anticipated this outcome. The news surprised and even slightly scared him, disrupting his usual routine. After so many years of living just the two of them, this was a significant change. Despite the constant nausea during her first months of pregnancy, the reoccurring abdominal and lower back pain, and frequent dizziness, Janet was ecstatic. Her pregnancy was challenging and required her to spend most of her time in the hospital, constantly receiving intravenous drips, taking medications, and enduring painful injections. There were several threats of miscarriage. Seth couldn't imagine what would happen to Janet if they lost the baby. Thankfully, the doctors managed to maintain the pregnancy due to Janet's strict monitoring. Truth be told, Seth didn't harbour any warm feelings for their future child. He literally viewed her or him as a problem, an obstacle preventing his wife from living a normal life. Susie was born, and Seth was the first to hold his tiny, wrinkled, red baby girl in his arms. Janet, his wife, insisted he be present during the birth. "This is a significant and long-awaited event," she said. "We've faced many challenges, and this is our reward. The doctors say we won't have more children, so—" Seth was reluctant to be in the delivery room. He feared the birth process and didn't feel any reverence for it, but he felt he had to be there. When Seth first saw his newborn daughter's face, he felt his world turn upside down. It had changed entirely. The baby screamed, overwhelmed by the sudden changes. Seth perceived that his daughter was cold and in pain. An innate instinct told him this. He held her close, gently rocking her in his arms. The baby sobbed a few more times, looked at him, and calmed down. She felt safe with her father. Seth realized that his daughter was now the most important person to him, and he would move mountains for her. Then the baby was handed over to her mother. Susie needed to be fed, and Seth was asked to leave the room. "You'll see them later," the midwife said with a smile. "The mother and baby need some time alone for now." Seth and Janet were devoted parents, endlessly fascinated by their little Susie. They found joy in everything she did, reaching for toys, moving her limbs, and even her humming. Her first smile, tooth, and steps were all momentous events for them. While Seth worked each day, Janet stayed home with Susie, immersing herself in motherhood. She had long awaited this role and embraced it fully. She cared for Susie, massaging her, cooking nutritious meals, taking her for walks, and diligently studying child development literature to apply the knowledge to her own child. As a result, Susie developed skills faster than her peers. She began to speak, draw, sculpt, and fasten buttons earlier than expected. Seth and Janet were thrilled with their clever, beautiful daughter. Susie physically resembled Seth's grandmother, with her thick dark hair, large brown eyes and dark skin, prompting blonde-haired, fair-skinned Janet to jokingly lament, "Nothing of me." Seth would retort good-naturedly, "No surprise, they say dark genes are stronger." Regardless, Janet couldn't help but admire how Susie's dark eyebrows and long dark eyelashes made her so striking that she wouldn't even need a makeup. Susie was a gentle, obedient, and incredibly curious girl, a trait inherited from both parents. Her curiosity was a source of concern for Janet, as Susie was always exploring. She was fascinated with everything, from items on the top closet shelves, to the inner workings of an alarm clock, to the depths of a puddle. She would climb trees to get a closer look at fruits or flowers, and perch above puddles, peering intently into their darkness. The man was proud of his daughter's inquisitive nature. Janet shared this sentiment, but she was often tired from constantly looking after her. Regardless, she never complained, finding joy in the challenges that came with raising their daughter. Seth sometimes felt that his wife was overly protective of their only child. He thought it would be beneficial to give the girl more independence. However, he didn't interfere with Janet's parenting methods. Firstly, she was well-read on child-rearing literature. Secondly, Janet had long desired motherhood, and now finally becoming a mother, he felt it was best to let her take the lead in their child's upbringing. Susie adored her parents. She eagerly awaited her father's return from work, ready to bombard him with questions and engage in playful activities. Seth enjoyed taking walks with his daughter in the park after work, discussing various topics, from insects to cartoons. Janet would sometimes join them, but often she preferred to stay at home, enjoying the peace and quiet while preparing a delicious dinner. Seth often took Susie to the playground, where the little girl freely climbed on the slides and roundabouts, something she wouldn't do when her overly cautious mother was present. Susie quickly made friends with other children, and Seth was certain she would enjoy kindergarten. However, Janet resisted the idea. She had intentionally resigned from her job to take care of Susie herself. "I didn't have her just to leave her to other people's care," she said. "I want to fully enjoy motherhood. Besides, kindergarten is just a holding centre for working parents. I have many activities planned for our girl to help her development. It's better for her to stay with me." Although Seth didn't dispute her, he occasionally mentioned the benefits of kindergarten, highlighting the presence of other children and the activities like songs and dances. Janet was preparing her daughter for a career in science and believed that she must follow in her footsteps. Susie seemed to be able to excel in this direction, quickly grasping any information. However, Seth noticed other talents in her. Susie's voice was extraordinary, clear, resonant, and high-pitched. When she sang songs from cartoons, Seth would find himself listening intently. His experience in music school, though not particularly successful, equipped him with enough knowledge to recognize Susie's remarkable ear for music. "Maybe we should take her to a music teacher for an audition," Seth suggested to his wife. "Susie has talent." "She's still a little girl," Janet dismissed. "Music schools accept older kids. Susie doesn't need that. She'll be a great scientist, you'll see." Becoming a mother had filled Janet with joy, but she had changed. She was overly anxious and focused too much on Susie. Nonetheless, it was an improvement from the time when she was trying to conceive. Seth still loved Janet, perhaps even more than when they were young. They had formed a family, and their wonderful child was growing up. Despite minor issues like Janet's excessive anxiety for their daughter, their life was filled with happiness. Seth often spoiled his daughter Susie with surprise gifts like sweets, dolls, and stuffed animals. Nothing made him happier than seeing her eyes light up with joy at the sight of a new gift. Hearing her say, "Thank you, Daddy," melted his heart. He had never imagined he could feel such intense emotions for something else. Janet always ensured that Susie's birthdays were memorable. She planned elaborate celebrations with themed decorations and gifts. For Susie's second birthday, the theme was Disney princesses. Her third birthday was an underwater king's palace party, inspired by Susie's fascination with the Little Mermaid. The fourth birthday was unicorn-themed, reflecting Susie's love for these mythical creatures. In just an hour, Janet could transform their apartment into a magical haven for Susie's favourite characters. "I wish I could ride one," she said dreamily. Janet only smiled and waved her hand, saying, "Daughter, you understand unicorns live far away. They don't wander into our places." "I understand, and it's very, very unfortunate." Seth decided to fulfill his daughter's birthday wish by any means necessary. He visited the racetrack and spoke with instructors who handle ponies. He had a fantastic idea and attempted to bring it to life. One of the instructors enthusiastically embraced Seth's plan. Together, they devised a masquerade costume for a beautiful white pony which would impersonate a unicorn. A twisted plastic horn on Velcro, pink ribbons for the mane and tail, aqua paint to draw hearts on the animal's sides, and a wreath of artificial flowers were all part of the transformation into a fairy tale character. Seth anticipated his daughter's joyous reaction. It was expensive, but he was willing to spend for his beloved little princess. With the main surprise prepared, Seth ordered a plush unicorn as a gift. The loving father didn't stop there. Susie was 4 years old, and it was time to give her something beautiful and elegant, something distinctly feminine. He wanted her to get used to it from a young age. So, Seth commissioned a jewellery workshop to create a wonderful set of silver bracelet and earrings. The unique detail was that the jewellery was crafted into tiny unicorns. Finding a craftsman willing to undertake such a complex task took a long time. Many professionals were reluctant to get involved. Eventually, an elderly jeweller agreed to the project. It was a lengthy process, filled with constant improvements and refinements. However, the final product was so beautiful that Seth couldn't help but admire it in awe. Janet was equally thrilled. "My God, what a miracle this is!" the woman exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it." "And there's nothing else like it in the world," Seth proudly replied, relishing his wife's reaction. "This is exclusive, especially for our Susie. Look, there on the bracelet. Her name is engraved in calligraphic script. How sweet and exquisite it all is. A gift for a real lady," Janet concluded. Susie's 4th birthday party was a resounding success. She woke to an apartment adorned with balloons, vibrant pictures, and unicorn-themed decorations. Gifts from her parents were piled high on a chair next to her crib. Among the toys, fancy dresses and colourful books, the unicorn jewellery stood out. Susie immediately asked to wear a bracelet and had not taken it off since. Seth watched his joyful daughter with a smile. In the evening, guests arrived, and the apartment instantly buzzed with noise and laughter. Grandparents, friends of Janet and Seth, and children Susie's age all gathered. Susie, the birthday girl, was showered with gifts and compliments. However, she also wanted to surprise her guests. Dressed as a princess, Susie stood on a chair and sang a song from her favourite unicorn cartoon for everyone. Seth listened to his daughter's pure, ringing voice. His heart swelled with tenderness and joy. He marvelled at the beautiful, talented daughter that fate had bestowed upon him and Janet. He vowed once again to do everything in his power to ensure Susie's happiness. The guests applauded loudly, calling Susie back for an encore. She happily obliged, enjoying the attention and the compliments. Uninhibited, brave, and charismatic, Susie was a born performer. Despite his wife's plans, Seth knew their daughter was destined for the stage. He believed Janet would eventually understand. The evening's main surprise was yet to come. Both children and adults rushed outside, gathering on the porch. A real unicorn, emerged from the archway, much to everyone's delight. Susie squealed with joy, an example quickly followed by the other children. A young fairy, played by an enthusiastic girl instructor, accompanied the unicorn. She wore a light floral sundress and let her blonde curls fall over her shoulders. "May I? May I go to him?" Susie asked the fairy, overcome with joy. Her biggest dream had come true. "Of course you can. He'll be happy to give you a ride," the fairy assured her. Susie enjoyed a couple of full rounds around the yard on the unicorn. After dismounting, she stroked its face and asked if her guests could also ride it. "Of course. He's here to make your party perfect." The young guests took turns riding the unicorn pony around the yard with joy in their eyes. Susie's party was unforgettable for them as well. Seth looked at his daughter, seeing her as not only intelligent and beautiful, but also kind and considerate. At the age of 4, she showed care for others by asking the fairy to give her guests a unicorn ride. What a thoughtful idea for a 4-year-old. It was a memorable day filled with vibrant impressions and equally vivid photos. One photo captured Susie hugging a new plush unicorn. A silver bracelet shone on her wrist, and a tiara crowned her head. She smiled broadly into the camera, radiating pure happiness. This was the photo Janet would hand over to investigators just 3 months later. One warm and sunny September evening, during the beautiful Indian summer, golden trees bathed in gentle sunlight and leaves rustled underfoot. Janet and Susie decided to enjoy the wonderful weather with a walk in the park, coinciding with the city's celebrations. The woman suggested a family walk in the park, but Seth declined due to work he had brought home from the factory. An important inspection was imminent and some reports needed to be urgently completed. "Regrettably, I won't be able to join my 2 beautiful ladies," Seth said, shaking his head, "though I would really like to." "But Daddy," Susie protested, pouting. Dressed in a light red dress and a matching beret, she looked charming. The beret was stylishly tilted to the side, and her shoulders were adorned with 2 tight braids tied with pink silk ribbons. Her new patent shoes added to her look. It wasn't a particularly modern style, but it was original and delightful. Janet enjoyed dressing her daughter up like a doll, always on the lookout for stylish, unique pieces. Susie usually stood out among other children. "Baby, I need to work." Seth waved his hands, "but don't worry. This weekend I promise we'll go to the ponds." "To the ponds?" Susie rejoiced. "That's great. We'll ride the Ferris wheel and feed the ducks buns, right?" "Yes," Seth smiled. "And then we'll go to the cafe to eat your favourite pancakes with berries. Deal?" "Deal. And now, have fun without me. But you'll tell me everything before bedtime and listen to your mum, okay?" "Okay." Susie hugged her father. Her red coat sleeves pulled up slightly, revealing her wrists. A silver bracelet with unicorns sparkled on one of them. The girl never took off her favourite jewellery. One of her earrings had already been lost due to an unreliable clasp. The second, now practically useless, lay in a box in Susie's desk. "Okay, we're off." Janet, her mother, smiled at her husband. Seth hugged his wife, kissed his daughter, walked them to the elevator, and waved at the closing door. The image of an all-dressed-up, happy Susie smiling at her father was still in his mind. Seth had no inkling that he would never see his daughter again. Seth returned to his apartment and sat at his computer, immersing himself in his work. He wanted to make the most of the quiet time before his daughter returned in a few hours. He knew she would want to share her experiences, and he would need to put his work aside to listen attentively. This parental engagement, Seth knew, was important for children. However, about an hour later, he heard a key turn in the lock. It was too early. Janet rushed into the living room, and Seth immediately noticed her dishevelled hair, unnatural paleness, trembling lips, and the panic in her eyes. "Susie didn't come back?" Janet asked, looking hopefully at her husband. Seth shook his head, his heart filled with terror. But she was with you, wasn't she? What happened? Seth asked, confused. Instead of responding, Janet dialed the police number in a rush. Seth found the details of the incident much later. First, Janet frantically searched the park for her daughter, interacted with the police, and attempted to calm herself down. Despite her hysteria, she managed to answer all the police's questions thoroughly. The search for the lost girl in the park began immediately. Police squads scoured the area, joined by volunteers. Trouble piled on the two unhappy parents, left no one indifferent. The police persuaded Janet and Seth to stay at home, arguing that the girl might return on her own. "We need someone home when she does. You won't be of help with the search," the policeman in uniform persuaded them. "It's unnecessary stress. We need to work calmly, without distractions. You understand?" Seth sat on the couch, holding his trembling wife tightly. Janet blamed herself relentlessly, using the harshest words. Initially, Seth wanted to blame Janet too. She wasn't vigilant enough. She lost sight of their child. However, upon seeing her state, he held back. There was no point in blaming someone already overwhelmed with grief. This could have happened to anyone. It was just an unfortunate accident. It wasn't Janet's fault.
"We had such a good walk along the alleys," the woman sobbed as she shared her memories. "Susie was delighted with everything happening in the park. She loved the animators, photographers with monkeys, music, the smell of cotton candy and popcorn, and the children's masterclasses."
The park was crowded that day, which was expected since it was City Day. Festive events always drew people from all over the city. The celebration's epicenter was the summer stage in the park's center, where a festive concert showcased the region's best children's groups. The little artists sang, danced, played musical instruments, and acted out scenes from famous works. The hosts held contests for the young spectators between performances and awarded the winners with prizes. Susie was drawn to the stage. "I didn't want to go there with her," Janet told her husband. "The crowd was massive, and she's just a little girl. Why did we need to push through? But Susie, she wanted to see the concert so badly. She begged me, pleaded with me, even tried to bribe me. As always, she was determined." Seth nodded, understanding exactly what Susie's ambitions were. She dreamed of performing on stage one day, as she was innately an artist, and there was no stopping her. With that, Janet and Susie found themselves in the middle of a large crowd. Janet hoped that seeing the vast sea of people and the challenge of reaching the stage would deter Susie, but the little girl was undeterred and kept moving closer to the stage. A local rock band then started to play. They were a young band, but had already made it onto big TV. Had Janet known about the celebrity performance, she wouldn't have brought Susie into the crowd, knowing the implications. Janet sobbed.
"There was such a crush. It felt like everyone in the park was surging towards the stage. I was terrified. I wanted to pick up Susie, but couldn't. We got separated, and she was lost in the sea of people."
Janet tried to call out for Susie, but her voice was drowned out by the loud music and cheering crowd. Once the concert ended, the crowd quickly dispersed. Janet dashed around the stage, asking everyone if they had seen a little girl in a red coat with 2 pigtails. People merely shook their heads and went about their business. Janet scoured the paths, alleys and playgrounds, searching for a small, bright red figure. Susie was so brightly dressed, she should be easy to spot in the crowd, but the girl was nowhere in sight. Eventually, Janet came across an old guard. The elderly man listened to her and proposed a possibility, which gave Janet a glimmer of hope. "Perhaps your little girl has already run home. She might have lost sight of you and found her way home. Does she know the route?" Janet nodded. "She knows the way," and then hurried home, filled with hope and near certainty. Susie must be at home. Where else could she be? But, to her disappointment, she found only a surprised Seth in the apartment. Initially, the search was intense. Posters of the missing girl went up on the city's posts and walls. Janet selected a photo from Susie's birthday party for these posters. By the end of the second day, both volunteers and police officers began to express doubts about finding the child alive, as safe outcomes usually occur within the first few hours of disappearance. However, Seth and Janet refused to lose hope. They scoured the internet for stories of children who returned home unharmed after missing for weeks or even months. Such cases do exist, and they aren't rare. During this time, the couple struggled to eat, sleep, or drink. The uncertainty of their little girl's condition and whereabouts was unbearable. How could they eat, knowing she might be in danger? Both parents began to lose weight noticeably. Janet was constantly racked with guilt, sometimes becoming hysterical. The worst periods were when she would sit, sway slightly, and stare blankly at a fixed spot. Seth perceived this as her way of disconnecting from reality to reset her nerves, but it was a frightening sight. Throughout these trying days, he was worried about leaving her alone. Several weeks passed, and Seth returned to work. It served as a minor distraction, despite the lingering dreadful thoughts. What had happened to Susie? How was she being treated? The thought of his beloved daughter, who knew nothing but love, attention, and warmth, now in the care of strangers, was unbearable. He imagined Susie, scared and missing home, probably crying, and it tore at his heart. Janet was also distraught. Both her mother and Seth's mother stayed with her, fearing what she might do to herself. They constantly were reminding Janet that Susie would need her when she returned. But guilt and the longing to hold her daughter again weighed heavily on Janet. At times, she was overcome with emotion, ripping her clothes, throwing dishes against the walls, and screaming in despair. Seth did not attempt to stop or calm her during these outbursts. 3 months had passed since Susie's disappearance. Winter had arrived, and the search efforts had quieted, though not ceased. The investigator admitted that the chances were slim, but assured them that the search would continue. The couple learned alarming statistics. Each year, many children disappear worldwide and are never found. This harsh reality had never crossed Seth's mind before. They had brought their delicate, talented girl into a world filled with sorrow and despair, and they had failed to protect her. The main theory of the investigation was kidnapping. After all, if the girl had merely gotten lost in the city or suffered an accident, she would have been found. However, Susie had vanished without a trace. Someone had evidently gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. As spring approached, a volunteer found Susie's clothing, her coat and beret, in a landfill. The investigator asked the parents to identify the garments. Janet immediately confirmed that they belonged to her daughter. She couldn't be mistaken, as she had been the one to buy the beautiful outfit for Susie. "What does this mean?" Seth asked hopefully. "It's difficult to tell," the investigator shrugged. "Maybe there's cause for reassurance. It appears the kidnapper didn't intend to harm the girl immediately. He discarded the clothes because they were conspicuous and could have drawn attention." "That's good," Janet whispered. After discovering the items, the couple felt certain that Susie would soon be found. They had waited so long without news, and finally, they had a promising lead. But unfortunately, the case stalled once again. Seth tried to encourage his wife to return to work. He knew that the research laboratory would gladly welcome her back, even after such a lengthy absence. Being involved in work she loved could help Janet regain a sense of purpose and normalcy. Her confinement within the 4 walls was draining her strength. "What are you saying?" Janet retorted. "So, I go back to work, and Susie comes home to find no one there? Do you understand what you're suggesting?" Now, Janet remained at home all the time, only leaving when her husband returned. She spent hours scouring the internet for stories of children happily returning home. These children had faced all sorts of predicaments. Some had run away and wandered the country, while others were kidnapped. Janet pondered various possibilities about her daughter's fate, but they were just guesses. 13 years passed. Janet had aged significantly, becoming a frail woman with serious heart issues. Seth found it incredibly painful to see his wife in such a state. She was still grappling with their loss. Seth was also hurting. He understood that the grief for their lost daughter would last forever. Unlike his wife, he accepted the situation, returning to life and work. On the contrary, Janet was driving herself to the brink of nervous exhaustion and illness. She blamed herself constantly. She would wake up screaming from terrible nightmares, despite frequent heart attacks and the doctor's strong insistence on hospitalization. Janet steadfastly refused. Seth would never admit it to his wife. She wouldn't understand, but sometimes he wished that Susie had finally been found, even if dead. Then perhaps Janet could accept the terrible truth. There would be some certainty, unlike now. The case made little progress. Over the years, the husband was repeatedly called to the station to identify children resembling Susie. Alerts for the missing girl were sent throughout the country. Occasionally, calls came in from various parts of the country. Concerned citizens claimed to have seen a girl who looked like Susie near a store, a playground, or a pond. Seth and Janet examined photos and surveillance video footage. Sometimes they were even shown homeless girls found at train stations, but Susie was never among them. "Take a closer look," the investigator urged. "Perhaps it's her. A lot of time has passed. She would have grown and changed." But both parents shook their heads. They were certain they would recognize their daughter, even if she had grown up. The investigators' calls only exacerbated Janet's condition. Each call brought a desperate hope followed by a bitter disappointment. These emotions reignited the pain she had felt years ago, often leading to hysterical breakdowns and self-blame. It took considerable effort for Seth to console his wife. Seth's acquaintances urged him to leave Janet, saying, "She herself is not living and she's preventing you from returning to normal life. You've accepted that Susie isn't coming back. You have a chance to remarry, perhaps become a father again." However, Seth couldn't imagine such a scenario. He still loved Janet. His wife was the closest person to him. Their shared tribulations had bonded them. While he no longer hoped for Susie's return, he still believed that Janet would recover from her immense grief and become herself again. He hoped they might travel again, believing a change of scenery would be beneficial. But things didn't work out. Another heart attack took Janet's life. She died in the arms of her distraught husband. The ambulance didn't arrive in time. He grieved. He was very sorry for Janet's ruined life. The man went over in his memory their life since the disappearance of their daughter, and tried to understand whether he could still do something for his wife to get her out of this state. It seemed that he couldn't. A few years later, Jasmine entered Seth's life. Approaching 60, he never imagined such a change in his destiny. Jasmine, one of his colleagues, was a divorced woman who single-handedly raised 2 sons. The boys had moved on. One was studying in the capital, and the other lived and worked in a distant seaside city. Accustomed to caring for others, Jasmine struggled with loneliness and feeling unneeded. Somehow, she and Seth gradually grew close. Seth felt at ease and content with this warm, caring woman. He reopened the joy of having someone who cared for and tried to please him. He also enjoyed feeling like a guardian and protector once more. Soon they were living together in Seth's apartment. He had renovated all the rooms long ago to erase reminders of his past family life. It was too painful to see the curtains chosen by Janet or the children's furniture brought specifically for Susie. and to realize that his daughter and beloved wife were no longer there and would never be again. Jasmine was well acquainted with the life story of her partner. She supported Seth, and her comfort took the form of hugs and gentle caresses, without pressuring him with unnecessary questions. In return, Seth also listened attentively to Jasmine's life stories. She had encountered hardships of a different kind. Her husband was an abusive alcoholic, and escaping him was a difficult task. Single-handedly raising 2 sons was no less challenging. Yet these trials didn't break Jasmine, they merely made her stronger. Of course, fate had prepared Seth for a much worse ordeal than to her. Despite this, he bore his sorrow, but thoughts of Susie haunted him from time to time. Anything could have triggered his memory of Susie, but this time it was a curious little girl bombarding her parents with questions. As the family continued their walk past Seth, he gave one last glance at the inquisitive child, smiling before turning the other way. He made his way towards a fountain. A small crowd had assembled in the square. Initially, he couldn't discern their interest, but then he heard a voice, clear, high and resonant. Someone was singing at the fountain, obscured by the crowd. The invisible girl was singing a melody from a cartoon about unicorns, Susie's favourite. The young singer's voice bore a striking resemblance to Susie's. Seth felt tears welling up in his eyes as a fresh wave of longing for her gripped him. Unable to ignore the singing, Seth weaved through the crowd and was astounded by the sight that met his eyes. A girl, about the same age Susie was when she disappeared, was standing by the fountain. She bore a faint resemblance to Susie, despite her clearly Romany features. Dark skin, long loose hair, black eyebrows and enormous brown eyes. She wore a long-sleeved blouse and a floor-length skirt adorned with ruffles. Around her neck was a bulky necklace, seemingly too large for such a petite girl. The little gypsy girl diligently played a tune that was painfully familiar to the man, dancing to the beat. The listeners smiled and generously tossed coins and bills into the box at the young performer's feet. Seeing the reception she received, the girl played with even more zeal. She suddenly raised her hands, executing another dance routine. Bracelets shone on her thin wrists. Seth was taken aback when he recognized one of the bracelets. Unicorns! It was an exclusive piece, for his daughter. Seth needed to examine the jewelry closer to be completely sure, but he already had a strong hunch. The girl finished the song, and the crowd applauded before dispersing. Seth remained frozen by the lamppost, unsure of what to do. He could approach the child and ask about the bracelet, but he didn't want to scare the little girl. It was better to wait for an adult to come for her. Surely they were nearby and wouldn't leave a young girl alone. And indeed, a few minutes later, a swarthy, black-eyed, curly-haired teenager approached the girl. He smiled at the singer, asked her something, and she responded. The boy patted her on the head, picked up the money box with his free hand, and led the girl away from the square. Concerned, Seth trailed the children. He wasn't sure of his next course of action. Should he approach the boy directly? If he did, the boy would likely grab the little girl and dash away. The boy seemed cautious, and undue attention might scare him off. So Seth kept his distance and continued to follow them. The children went past the main square, navigated through a maze of narrow streets, and found themselves on the city's outskirts. A vacant lot lay beyond the street, followed by a bypass road. From a distance, Seth spotted a camp, wagons, people around fires, and people's noise. So, this is where the children were headed. Seth contemplated following them and speaking to the adults, but would he be welcomed? Despite his apprehension, he felt compelled to continue his investigation. For the first time in years, he had found a potential lead about Susie. Could this be the breakthrough he needed to find his daughter? Would he finally uncover what happened to his princess? With determination, Seth continued to follow the children. Suddenly, the boy noticed him, looked back warily and quickened his pace. The little girl could barely keep up with him, running through the grass with her tiny feet in stubby sneakers. Suddenly, from the last house on the street, a young Romany woman appeared. It was clear that she was the mother of the little singer. The girl quickly withdrew her hand from the boy's grasp, ran to the woman, and embraced her. The beautiful Romany woman showered the child's face with kisses, whispering affectionate words into her ear. The little singer laughed joyfully. Seth stood frozen in place. A young Romany girl? Her hair, eyes, eyebrows, lips. She bore a striking resemblance to Seth's grandmother, who Susie also looked so much like. The realization hit Seth like a cold splash of water. No, it can't be. The woman's tanned face, white-toothed smile, large gold earrings, and a distinctive mole. A mole on her cheek, which Seth found himself surprisingly familiar with. It was shaped like a small heart, just like Susie's. Susie had always been glad that she had the same mark on her cheek as the unicorn from the cartoon. The woman noticed Seth's intense gaze, and her smile slowly faded. She held the child closer and was about to leave when Seth called out to her. "Susie? Susie!" The gypsy paused, scrutinizing the strange, mature man before her. Clutching her daughter, she resolutely approached him. "Excuse me," Seth began. "Don't be scared, I won't harm you. I just need you to make a prediction." The latter phrase slipped out unexpectedly, the first thought that crossed his mind. After all, it was known that gypsy women told fortunes for a living. "Fortune-telling?" The girl grinned, and the little girl in her arms mirrored her smile. "All right, I'll tell your fortune. Esmeralda, go back to the camp and wait for me there." The girl nodded obediently and scurried off towards the gypsy's camp, following the boy, who was already near the vacant lot. "Is her name Esmeralda?" Seth asked, smiling at the gypsy woman. The more he observed her, the more he was convinced that she was the grown-up Susie. The man realized he might be letting his imagination run wild, but there were too many coincidences. The song from his daughter's favorite cartoon, sung by little Esmeralda, the bracelet on the girl's hand, and the young gypsy woman's appearance. "Yes, my daughter's name is Esmeralda," the woman finally responded. "What do you want me to predict?" "Many years ago, my daughter was kidnapped while out for a walk with her mother. They got caught in a crowd, and she was lost in the crush. She was never found. I want to know what happened to her. I'm willing to pay whatever the cost," Seth said. "Kidnapped daughter?" The gypsy woman's voice trembled. "That's frightening. I can't predict such a thing. May I ask where your little girl got that bracelet?" "My daughter had the same one," Seth asked, afraid that the woman might leave after his question. "I also have a question. Why did you call me Susie?" she countered. "That was my daughter's name, and I thought that—" "That I was her," she interrupted. "Yes," Seth admitted, chuckling at the unexpected turn of their conversation. "My name is Penelope. That's what the gypsies call me. But on the back of this bracelet, which I've never parted with, it says Susie. I came up to you because you called me by that name. It's strange and interesting." "I can't believe it. Apparently, you really might be my daughter. Tell me about yourself, please. Who are your parents? How long have you been in gypsy camp? Were you born there?" Penelope shook her head. "No, I'm a foundling. My father found me ragged and hungry at the train station. I don't remember it myself, I was small. But this bracelet, it's been with me as long as I can remember. They told me my grandmother gave it to me. Now I realize it's from another life. I always knew it. I ordered it for my daughter's 4th birthday," Seth said, shaking his head. "It's unique. There can be no mistake. It belonged to Susie. I believe that's you. Tell me more about yourself." Penelope sighed. From the moment I arrived in this town with my family, everything felt familiar. The cityscapes, the smells, the situations. Now, our meeting. I want to understand it all too. Little Penelope always knew that her father, Sylvanus, had picked her up at the train station. "Your family abandoned you. White people often do that to get rid of unwanted children. We Roma have a different attitude towards children." The Sylvanus' family, already having 4 sons, welcomed a little girl into their home. She was treated with care and tenderness by her mother Camille, grandmother Rini, and her brothers. The little girl, who had a gift for singing and dancing, quickly became a beloved and valued member of the family. Her talents also presented a potential source of income for the family. She particularly enjoyed performing with her brothers, dancing and singing around the fire, to the approval and applause of their community. Like the rest of their community, the family lived in a van, travelling across the country and stopping in various towns. The scenery, the people, and the homes all changed as they moved. Penelope experienced both large metropolitan cities and smaller urban settlements, meeting new people and performing in public squares. This was how the gypsies earned their living. Upon arriving at a new settlement, the children would sing and dance, the women would tell fortunes, and the men would engage in their own secretive, serious business. Only when she grew older did Penelope understand what this business entailed: stealing. This was the reason they never stayed in one place for too long, to avoid persecution, retaliation, and the police. Penelope liked her way of life. She loved her strict father, Sylvanus, her affectionate and talkative mother, Lavinia, and her caring, yet different brothers. She had a particularly close relationship with her grandmother, Rini, Sylvanus's mother. The old woman doted on Penelope, telling her stories, giving her jewellery, and performing rituals to keep her happy and healthy. She often reminded Penelope how lucky she was because Sylvanus had found her alone and abandoned at a train station. "They frequently spoke ill of my biological parents," Penelope said, studying Seth's face for familiar features. "They claimed that white people were irresponsible towards their children, but I saw a different picture on city streets. Yes, there were street children, but I also saw many affluent families with happy and secure children. Finally, I deduced that it was my biological parents who were at fault, because why else would a child be left at a train station?" She looked at Seth defiantly. He understood her implication. If he truly was her father, then he was responsible for leaving a little girl alone at a train station, hungry and in rags. "How did I end up at the train station?" the gypsy girl asked, staring at the man. "Didn't you watch your daughter? Or did you decide to abandon her?" "What are you speaking?" Seth retorted. "Our little girl was our most precious treasure." He began to reminisce about the blissful 4 years he and Janet had spent with their beautiful daughter. He described the struggle they faced to have a child, then narrated Susie's early years, recollecting those warm, joyful moments. It happened, he had forgotten very little. He remembered Susie's first skills, their shared travels, walks, and splendid holidays that Janet had planned for her daughter. "Our girl loved unicorns and sang beautifully, just like your daughter Esmeralda. How did she know the song she sang at the fountain? That's Susie's favourite song. She used to sing it in a very similar way." Penelope didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be trying to remember something. "I taught it to her," the woman finally said. "Something from my past life lingered. Not just the bracelet. I remembered that song. I could read at the age of 4, surprisingly, and I've retained that ability. We don't teach girls to read, only boys, and even then, only superficially. But I can read. Sometimes I dreamed about people who loved me deeply. I don't remember their faces, but I remembered their hands, warm and caring. I thought it was my imagination. Also, just now, when you were telling the story, I recalled something. Yes, I really rode a unicorn. A real one. I've dreamt of this scene several times, and the unicorn was exactly as you just described it. So, are we really father and daughter? We can only confirm after a DNA analysis, Seth said, his voice trembling. But it appears to be true. Penelope pressed her fingers to her temples and wrinkled her nose, just like her mother used to do when she was worried. So, what do we do now? The young woman looked at the mature man, her face filled with confusion, seeking reassurance. I think we need to verify everything to be sure, but I no longer doubt that you are Susie. There are too many coincidences. I think you should go back to your real home, or do you want to keep living in a gypsy camp? Didn't you mention that you were happy with the gypsies? That's how it was when I was a kid. Penelope shook her head. When I grew up, everything changed. Children in the camp are treated very differently, but life for adults is not sweet at all. There are many chores, and women must obey men unquestionably. A husband can even beat his wife for disobedience, and he faces no consequences. I can't do what I want to do. Read, walk, study, and I have to deceive people for money. That's the most unpleasant thing. If I don't bring money home in the evening, I'll be punished. And I've been punished more than once. Penelope then recounted how Sylvanus married her off when she was about 16 years old. Her family had chosen a suitable groom for their only daughter, the son of a well-off gypsy. Damien, the groom, was as young as Penelope. It was well known in the camp that he was passionately in love with someone else. However, the girl was not his equal, so marriage was not possible. Penelope cried before the wedding. She didn't want to get married. Even though Damien was young, handsome and wealthy, she still felt like a child. Moreover, she was aware of the groom's feelings for another girl. They eventually got married due to family pressure. This union brought Esmeralda into their family. Penelope discovered a deep love for her daughter. Esmeralda became the center of her world, providing a beacon of light in her life. Damien, however, remained indifferent to both his wife and daughter, focusing on his own interests. Everyone was aware of this, but it was accepted behavior for a man. Penelope didn't mind and felt no jealousy. Her attention was completely absorbed by her daughter. She sang songs to her, crafted beautiful clothes for her, and braided her hair. Esmeralda inherited her mother's talent for singing and dancing. The people of the camp decided to utilize this gift fully. As Esmeralda became older, she became a street performer. She performed in various city squares, and did so with enjoyment. The audience applauded the young girl, generously compensating her for her performances. Esmeralda would respond to their appreciation with a happy smile. However, Penelope was deeply concerned about her daughter's future. She realized that Esmeralda was destined to follow the same path as she had. Esmeralda wouldn't receive an education or a professional career, instead continuing to entertain people with her voice. Penelope feared that as Esmeralda grew older and lost her childlike charm and spontaneity, she would be made a fortune-teller. I believe they kidnapped you in the crowd, Seth said, looking at his daughter. Convinced now, he regretted the lost years his daughter spent in among strangers, adhering to unfamiliar traditions and strict rules. But everything would change now. It's possible, she shook her head. In my time it didn't happen, but Grandma Rini told me that in the past, childless gypsy couples would pick up children from city streets. They'd choose young ones who would barely remember the past and raise them as their own. Grandma Rini said they tried to find dark-haired babies to avoid suspicion. A blonde child amongst dark-haired gypsies would be conspicuous. And you look just like my grandmother, Seth smiled. I'll show you the pictures later. The resemblance is uncanny. That fact probably worked against us too. The gypsies chose you because you looked somewhat like them." "Still, can't believe it." Penelope looked completely lost. She glanced between the tower, clearly visible from here, and Seth. "So you're going to leave there, right now? You'll take the child, claim her as your own, and never return. I'll go with you, just in case." "It's not that simple. They won't let me leave." "What do you mean they won't let you leave? I'll call the police. They'll be arrested for kidnapping." "No, we have to handle this differently. You don't know these people. We need to act secretly. Afterward, we'll have to leave because they'll be searching for me, and they'll eventually find me. Betrayal is severely punished here. You'll be in danger too. Consider it. Do you really want all this? Do you want to disrupt your peaceful life? Take your time. It's a big decision." "Of course I'm ready," Seth responded immediately. "All right, then let's do it this way. Tomorrow, I'll go with Esmeralda to the square. I always accompany her. We're monitored during the day. They check in the morning, then around noon, and again in the evening. At 11. Come get us at 11. We're not being followed at that time. We'll have to hide, lie low for a while, maybe a week, maybe a month. They'll be searching for me." "Hide in my apartment. No one's going to search for you there." "Do you live alone?" Penelope asked. "No one will mind us?" "No, but I'm not alone," Seth said, but he was certain that Jasmine would understand, as she always did. "Is that my mum? Your wife?" Seth shook his head again. A painful sting shot through his heart. Janet hadn't waited for her daughter and had gone without knowing what happened to Susie. It was so painful, so sad. "Tomorrow at 11. I'll come for you." "Okay, I have to go now." Penelope quickly turned around and rushed to the gypsy camp. It seemed she was already expected there. For the rest of the day and night, Seth was in an odd state. He was filled with joy and then suddenly filled with doubt. What if Penelope was not Susie after all? Standing next to the girl, he had no doubt that she was his daughter. But now, when she was far away, it seemed to him that he had imagined this meeting and manipulated the facts to fit his narrative. Jasmine, who always listened attentively to Seth, was also very excited, almost to the point of tears. Unlike Seth, she was certain that everything would be all right. "This woman is definitely Susie. Such coincidences are impossible. I can't wait to meet her and her daughter." Seth didn't sleep that night, tossing and turning. He was preoccupied with the thought that Susie and Esmeralda might not show up at the square by the fountain the next day. Susie, being quite capable of changing her mind, might choose a different life path. Or was she just tricking him? Why? Perhaps she just enjoyed fooling others? The next day, both Jasmine and Seth took time off work. Seth arrived at the fountain earlier than the agreed time. Little Esmeralda, just like the previous day, delighted the crowd with her clear, ringing voice. Susie was initially out of sight, but then Seth spotted her. She sat at a distance, watching her daughter intently. They locked eyes and she gestured for him to take his time. He nodded in understanding and kept observing, trying not to miss an important moment. Finally, Susie stood up from the bench, quickly walked over to Esmeralda, took the little girl into her arms, and then hurried over to Seth. From there, they all strolled through the narrow streets until they reached the parking lot, where Seth had left his car. Penelope constantly looked over her shoulder, worried that she was being followed, but there was no one behind them. Jasmine welcomed the two runaways, providing them with comfortable clothes and a homemade meal. She loved caring for others, and now had two individuals in need of affection and comfort. Penelope glanced around, as if trying to recall the past. "I've renovated the apartment. It's completely transformed since you lived here," Seth explained. "But you know, the feeling from the window seems familiar," the young woman responded thoughtfully. "Something's missing, though. I think there used to be a tall tree here. Its branches would scratch against the glass. I really used to enjoy that back then." "It was cut down," Seth replied, surprised at Susie's detailed memory. "It had blocked the light, so it was removed." "That's a shame." The grandfather and his young granddaughter strolled along the seashore, their bare feet imprinting the wet sand. Esmeralda was full of questions, much like her mother had been. She was a quick and clever girl, already displaying an aptitude for learning. Seth was certain she would excel in school, as she could already read, write, and count with ease. Seth was now escorting Esmeralda to music school. The family had agreed that her evident talent shouldn't be wasted, and Susie enrolled her in music classes. Initially, the teachers were hesitant due to Esmeralda's young age, and suggested waiting another year. However, their opinions changed after hearing her audition. It was a sunny day in September, and school had begun. Seth accompanied Esmeralda to her 4th music lesson. So far, she was thrilled with the music school, and he hoped her enthusiasm would persist. If not, they would explore other interests for Esmeralda. The man could hardly believe how his life had changed. A year prior, Penelope and Esmeralda had hidden in the apartment for about a month. The gypsy camp had left long ago, but gypsies continued to prowl the city, questioning people. Once, a young man even approached Seth, asking if he had seen a gypsy woman with a small child, adding that she was mentally ill and dangerous. Unable to feel at ease in the city, Susie proposed to move to another place. She was certain they would return to punish her for her betrayal. As always, for the sake of her daughter's happiness and tranquility, Seth was prepared for anything. Jasmine supported him and suggested a relocation to a seaside town where her youngest son lived. So there they were, in a quiet, cosy place by the sea. Jasmine had secured a job at the local library. She enjoys babysitting her son's children and Esmeralda. The children have become friends and enjoy their time together. Susie is gradually adjusting to her new world. Once, Janet had big plans for her daughter's career. The years have passed irrevocably, and Susie, without formal education, is now studying at a hairdressing course. In the evenings, she sings at a restaurant, much to the audience's delight. She enjoys the stage, and the extra income is a bonus. Seth is now at ease about his daughter. She is smart, motivated, and hard-working. She's made many friends in her new place, although she is cautious about discussing her past, fearing that rumours may lead the Roma to find her. She still grapples with some fears, but Seth and Jasmine are there to support her. "All right, let's get our shoes on," Seth commanded, carrying his flip-flops and his granddaughter's sandals in his free hand. "Shall we take a dip? The water is so warm. We'll be quick," suggested the girl. "You'll be late for class," the happy grandfather smiled. "Let's do it later, after class." "Come on," agreed Esmeralda placidly. "Then we'll go to the pond, to the city, feed the ducks, okay?" Seth glanced at his granddaughter, reminded of little Susie, who often asked him to accompany her to the pond to feed the ducks. Seth was quite content. His daughter, his granddaughter, his beloved woman were beside him. Only thoughts of Janet troubled him. He deeply regretted that his wife never learned about the fate of their lost daughter, but there was nothing he could do about it. "Grandad, what are you thinking about?" Esmeralda tugged at Seth's arm and demanded an answer. "You've got that sad face again." "It's not sad. It's pensive. I'm trying to decide if, after class, we should go to a pizza place or an ice cream parlour." "I don't know." The girl puzzled, then smiled slyly and asked, "Grandad, do I have a pensive face like yours right now, too?" Seth looked at this bright, happy child and smiled. All sad and worrisome thoughts immediately left his head.